Shabbat Shalom from under the dome. My name is noelhadley, and of course, this is the Unexpected Cosmology. This is my third presentation that I have given on Miriam of Migdal. And of course, when I gave the first one about 6 or 7 months ago now, I was so nervous about it, I didn't even want to present it to the group. And I contacted Josh privately. I'm like, hey, can we do a private recording on this, just on a night of the week that nobody else is listening in? A couple of my mods or admins did listen in. I think Rebecca and Katie were there listening in at that time, maybe Pamela as well. And I thought that was kind of all the material I had. I'm like, well, this is what I've looked into. This is what I have. And like any kind of investigation, when you start kind of moving the pieces around and stuff, and the picture starts forming, all of a sudden it starts unraveling. You start seeing more and more and more. I gave a second presentation about a couple of months ago. This is my third that I'm giving, and it's going to be a good chunk of material tonight. Anyways, we are starting on page 67. And as I was telling the group before I started, I'm so glad that this is 67 and not the other big number. And I'm always trying so hard not to show to flash like occult gang signs to show my like street cred or whatever. I'm always trying hard not to. So starting on page 67, and this is called The Woman and the Alabaster Jar Revisited. Now, if you are listening to this live in the group tonight and you did not listen to any of the others, apologies. Hopefully you're not going to be left behind. For the rest of you, if you are listening to this on the podcast or YouTube land or wherever, you have the advantage to go back and track down the other two presentations I gave, which particularly the first one, if you're coming into this and you're not going to know what I'm talking about, but it is what it is. So let's get right to it. Page 67, The Woman in the Alabaster Jar Revisited. I slipped up. It happens in an investigation such as this one. You will recall that I spent so much time at the dinner party of Shimon the Jar Maker attempting to identify Miriam of Migdal as the woman with the alabaster jar that I didn't even think to interview the host, Simon. He was her father. How did I possibly miss that one? And here I thought the puzzle was complete, or as complete as it would ever be, but no. The Miriam story arch takes on an entirely new perspective when that little nugget of information is known. Do recall how the dinner party takes place immediately following Eliezer's vacancy from the tomb when he's resurrected. I had speculated earlier that Simon invited Eliezer over because he wanted to see what a resurrected person looked like in person. Perhaps ask him a few questions about the afterlife, who knows? It didn't even cross my mind that the party was thrown as a gift of gratitude to the man who brought his son back to life. Why do I come to that conclusion? Because Lucas mentions a parashim, Matthew or Matithyahu and Marcus identify him as Simon, whereas Yochanan/John is the one who mentions Eliezer by name. All four Gospels assume one lodging at Bethany. Simon and Eliezer lived in the same household. And guess who wasn't invited to the party? The woman with the alabaster jar. Revisiting the Lucas account, this is what we read. Now, when the Pharisee, the Pharisee, which had bidden him, saw it, he spoke within himself, saying, "This man, if he were a prophet, would have known who and what manner of woman this is that touches him, for she is a sinner." That comes from Luke 7:36 through 39. Or just, I guess, verse 39. Little typo there. Miriam of Migdal was not welcome at the party because Simon the Pharisee had deemed it so. An outcast from her own family, she was probably lingering around outside with the dogs. Remember when Yahusha arrived at Eliezer's wailing procession? Ask yourself why Martha was among the mourners, whereas her sister wasn't. No, Miriam was off on her own and already dead to some of them. It's why Simon the Pharisee was off mumbling to himself, somewhat hysterical, that Yahusha would put two and two together if he were truly a prophet. Well, I'm not a prophet and rather slow at these things. I have already covered the sexual connotations of the hair washing episode. But then there's the other facet to the story. Miriam's lack of head covering was a telltale sign that she had no husband or protector. Except for Yahusha, that is. Of course, that's my opinion. Immediately I will be told that Yahusha would be breaking Torah and taking Miriam to wife if her father was against the idea. But I disagree. He had already turned his daughter out. In doing so, he had forsaken any authority on what vows she might make before Yahuwah. Torah does have something to say about that, and I'm about to show you. So this would come from Numbers 31 through 16. It's almost the whole chapter. I'm just going to read it here. And Moshe spoke unto the heads of the tribes concerning the children of Yasharel, saying, This is the thing which Yahuwah has commanded. If a man vows a vow unto Yahuwah or swear an oath to bind his soul with a bond, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. If a woman also vows a vow unto Yahuwah and bind herself by a bond, being in her father's house in her youth, you can see I put that in red there, that's important, and her father hears her vow and her bond wherewith she has bound her soul, and her father shall hold his peace at her, then all her vows shall stand, and every bond wherewith she has bound her soul shall stand. But if her father disallows her in the day that he hears, not any of her vows or of her bonds wherewith she has bound her soul shall stand. And Yahuwah shall forgive her, because her father disallowed her. And if she had at all a man, when she vowed, or uttered aught out of her lips, wherewith she bound her soul, and her man heard it, and held his peace at her in the day that he heard it, then her vow shall stand, and her bonds wherewith she bound her soul shall stand. But if her man disallowed her on the day that he heard it, then he shall make her vow which she vowed, and that which she uttered with her lips, wherewith she bound her soul, of no effect, and Yahuwah shall forgive her. Now here's another part I deemed important right here in verse 9. But every vow of a widow, and of her that is divorced, wherewith they have bound their souls, shall stand against her. And if she vowed in her man's house, or bound her soul by a bond with an oath, and her man heard it, and held his peace at her, and disallowed her not, then all her vows shall stand, and every bond wherewith she bound her soul shall stand. But if her man has utterly made them void on the day he heard them, then whatsoever proceeded out of her lips concerning her vows, or concerning the bond of her soul, shall not stand. Her man has made them void, and Yahuwah shall forgive her. Every vow and every binding oath to afflict the soul, her man may establish it, or her man may make it void. But if her man altogether hold his peace at her from day to day, then he establishes all her vows, or all her bonds which are upon her. I know this is really wordy, but it's like Yahuwah is trying to check off all the possible things, the scenarios that may come up, just to make sure everything is covered. Then he establishes all her vows or all her bonds which are upon her. He confirms them, because he held his peace at her in the day that he heard them. But if he shall anyways make them void after that he has heard them, then he shall bear her iniquity. Here is another part I deemed important. These are the statutes which Yahuwah commanded Moshe between a man and his woman, between the father and his daughter, being yet in her youth in her father's house. Again, that comes from Numbers 31 through 16. The relationship between a woman and her father, and his role in either canceling out or accepting the vows his daughter has made with Yahuwah, are given in great detail in Numbers chapter 30. Assuming she has the hots for another boy and her father hears about it and puts his foot down, the Torah offers them no rights in pursuing that relationship any further. That is, if her father says anything. If she makes a vow and he holds his peace, saying nothing against the arrangements, he is not allowed to take it back at a later hour. She is in her full rights to move forward. It says in her youth. The general idea is that she would remain under the care and protection of her father until it was agreed upon that another man would take her in as his wife. But then notice something else. A father only has a say in his daughter's vows so long as she remains under his roof. If he has turned her out, or is no longer financially providing for her, then he has lost all say on the matter. It furthermore specifies the rights of a widow or a divorced woman. They too can vow without their father's intervention. seeing as how he has already released them at an early hour. The idea is that once the father releases his daughter, he can't take her. He can't force his hand to take her back again. I mean, maybe you should be like, hey, can you take me under your roof again? And, whatever. But once he has turned her out, handed her out to another man or whatever, he cannot then go speak against her vows. And so, revisiting Simon's reaction once again, we read, "Now when the Pharisee, which had bidden him, saw it, he spoke with himself, saying, This man, if he were a prophet, would have known who and what manner of woman this is that touches him, for she is a sinner." Simon grumbled amongst himself in questioning Yahusha's character. Because if you stop to think about it, Yahusha accepting her put his moral judgment into question. He did not protest, however, because the Torah had no longer given him the authority to do so. Miriam was pressed to make her own decision now. The reason why seems obvious enough. Either Simon had already released Miriam to another man, and she was a widow or divorced, or there is the more likely option that she had made a vow, her father did not allow for it, and she went ahead with it anyways, resulting in her being turned out and disowned. Hold on, I just thought of something. Simon was referred to as a jar maker in Mark 14:3. Yes, a jar maker. Are you connecting the pieces now? Miriam offered Yahusha the nard from her alabaster jar. The scripture writers are offering various clues, but I have been slow in taking the bait. For all I know, Simon had given his two daughters a jar as an offering to their future husband, and Miriam kept hers, despite being turned out. Simon knew exactly what was happening when she brought that thing into the room and cracked it open. And now for the reason why I wanted to revisit the woman with the alabaster jar. I have stumbled upon another book during the course of my investigation into everything biblical, which not only identifies Miriam of Magdalene as the woman with the alabaster jar, but gives clarifying detail as to why she landed in her predicament. It comes from the book of the Natsarim, which we'll be reading more afterwards, and a lot of you have really been excited about recently, and reads as follows. So this comes from chapter 19. When Yahusha spent the days in Jerusalem, the nights were spent on the slopes of Mount Olive, and the disciples built shelters close to a place where there was an oil press. I really like that little detail there, that it says the disciples built shelters. I don't think we read that anywhere else. However, one day at eventide, Yahusha went to the house of Simon the Pure, where some women who were followers of his were living. Though the disciples were given food, little was said to them, for they being strangers, the people in the house were suspicious, and Simon lay on a cushion across from Yahusha. Pause. Of course, there's more to this. We find ourselves in the house of Simon again, though he is given the name Simon the Pure rather than Simon the Leper this time around, telling us that he has been restored to good standing within the religious community. The same could be said regarding his once dead son, I suppose. Not his daughter, though. The text informs us that he had daughters, plural, though if we're being technical, it says there were women who were followers of Yahusha and living with him, which is the same thing. Or it might be something different, but I think it's the same thing. One of those daughters was left outside. Have you ever visited Yasharil during the lunar month of Nisan? There are some warm days, but overall it is crisp and the nights can get cold. Continuing. After they had eaten and were talking together, a woman came from a house nearby. She was veiled and carried an alabaster jar. Now this was Miriam of Magdalene, whose father had been a merchant, but he disowned her, for she had lived with a centurion serving in the army of Rome. When he returned to his lawful wife, Miriam had kept herself by singing in the taverns of Galilee. Pause again. That is crazy. Long have we sought Miriam's predicament. It was sitting around waiting to be told to us in a book which practically nobody in the modern world has heard about until now. And so, what have we so far learned? First of all, the woman with the alabaster jar was Miriam of Magdalene. There is no longer a question about that fact now. her father is described as a merchant. I'm willing to bet he was a jar maker and that he was sitting on the cushion across from Yahusha when she entered. He is also referred to as Simon the jar merchant, you know. And as you can see, he disowned her. The reason being is that she played house with the centurion serving in the army of Rome without his vocal or written permission. She obviously didn't plan that one out. Love will do that to a person. Seems as though his tour of duty came to an end and he returned home to the real wife, leaving her behind. Seeing as how Miriam's father wouldn't take her back, she had little choice but to pass around the tip jar in the taverns of Galilee. That answers my other question, by the way. How the sister of Eliezer and Martha could reside in Magdala. We still don't know, because I went through that the last presentation, where how is it if Miriam is the same, Miriam Migdal is the same Mary who is the sister of Martha? Because, you know, there's Martha and Mary, and then there's Mary Migdal, right? Well, if she is Martha's sister, then how is she living in Migdal and not in Bethany? Well, there's your answer right there. Now, we still don't know how she ended up there, but it's not too difficult to imagine her reasonings. You figure the money was decent for a tavern singer among all those rowdy fishermen. The passage before us claims Miriam was staying at another house nearby. Some will tell me that proves she wasn't Simon's daughter, though the reasoning why she was staying in a separate location is as easy as an explanation as any. Read verse 1 again. The disciples had built shelters close to a place where there was an oil press. I'm guessing they put the women up in lodging, particularly if they were betrothed or unmarried. The problem this time around is that Simon wouldn't have her, and her father, whoever her father was, obviously wouldn't. And so she was pressed to find other accommodations. Most likely, the other Miriams related to Yahusha joined her. That would be Miriam Salome, Yahusha's aunt, as well as his mother, Miriam. And just to point out here, even if Simon the jar maker isn't her father, it's clear that Eliezer and Martha lived at Bethany, which means that their father would have lived at Bethany, the same father who turned her out. So Simon the jar maker is either her father or is probably very close friends with her father, and they're both jar maker merchants, mind you. Continuing. The woman unsealed the jar and poured a sweet scented oil over the head of Yahusha, seeing which some of those present were indignant, saying, "What a waste, when this could have been sold for a lot of money, which would have benefited the poor." We've seen that in all the different Gospels. Yahusha said, "Leave her alone. There is little point in being angry with her when all she has done is to honor me. You can help the poor whenever you like, but I will not be here much longer." Turning to Miriam of Migdal, he said, "Why do you pay me this honor? For the cost to you must have been great." And then, I love this in verse 7. Someone said, "The price was easily obtained." Pause. Much of what we have just read should be familiar by this point. There are a couple of unique flourishes worth commenting upon, though. Yahusha asked Miriam why she paid him this great honor, thereby setting up the marriage conversation to follow. It's all a setup. Somebody then interrupts her with a rather snide remark, indicating that the price of her fragrance was easily obtained, as if that's not awkward. What is that suggesting of her? Who said that exactly? Her father? We are not told. It would certainly fit other descriptions of him in that he was putting Yahusha's quality as a prophet into question. Basically, who was murmuring? It was Simon the jar maker. So I'm kind of suggesting that he may have been the one that said the price was easily obtained. But then something I had neglected to mention was the fact that she had already veiled herself in verse 3. In no other variation are we given that information. I have no idea whether or not a Galilee lounge singer would cover her face when stepping up to the bar stool and stage, but she clearly was amending her ways now. Being veiled is an act of modesty and greatly contrasts the easily obtained quip, which was likely intended to cheapen whatever was going on between her and Yahusha. It's as if the speaker is attempting to convince everyone that she broke open the nard and offered her hair to any other number of men. See what I mean? Continuing. Miriam said to Yahusha, Sire, I am she whom you saw in Penias. For when women reviled me, I came to you and said, forgive my sins. When you asked wherein I had sinned, I said, by loving while unwed. Thereupon you said, that of itself is no wrongdoing, and demonstrates greater love than that of many who say, the price of my love is marriage. You said I gave the greatest form of love any woman can give. For being virgin, I went to my love without the security of marriage, seeing in no way to bind the man, or seeking in no way to bind the man, excuse me. Yahusha said, with this man you did no wrong, and though your love was unblessed in the eyes of men, providing you loved truly, it was pure and sanctified in the sight of Elohim. The man, however, is not without sin in this manner, and will surely be called to a proper accounting. And though since leaving him you have done wrong, he bears his portion of the guilt. You chose freely not to be a woman reserved for marriage, a choice you could rightly make. Only should you now seek marriage, saying, though I love you too, now I have my price, would you be doing wrong, this being committed against Elohim love and your husband. I wonder what's being said here. In Nazareth, we've got a problem. Miriam claims she was told by Mashiach on an earlier occasion that she had committed no sin in handing her virginity over, or we assume virginity, over to a man outside of wedlock. Yahusha then responds that she's right, that she had done no wrong. That can't be. We have already read the part about her father turning her out. There is no way he consented to his daughter bedding with a Roman centurion outside of wedlock. That right there is a breaking of Torah. The only situation where I can see this working is in his demanding the bride price be paid soon as he found out about their sexual relationship. And so this comes from Exodus 22:16. And if a man entices a maid that she is not betrothed and lie with her, he shall surely endow her to be his woman. If her father utterly refuses to give her unto him, he shall pay money according to the dowry of virgins. Is this what happened? Miriam may have given her heart to a man with the expectation that she become his woman. We're dealing with a case of lust and hormones and two consenting adults entangled within the world of polygamy rather than prostitution. Her father would have then demanded a bride price. If he refused to hand her over to, let me say that again. If he refused to hand her over to Loverboy, he could still demand payment according to the dowry of virgins. Not that a cocky Roman centurion need oblige the Torah, according to his thinking. It seems to me that a payment of some sort was offered. I base this upon Yahusha's evaluation. He said there was no wrong committed initially. Yes, there was a transgression, but that had to do with the centurion ditching his woman rather than his taking her in. The Roman centurion, ditched Miriam and Magdalene. He would be held accountable for his recklessness, but now what about Miriam? She had already been turned out by two men, her father and now this Roman centurion. What is a little lonesome girl to do in a man's world? According to Yahusha, she had committed further wrongs in the years between the Roman centurion and him. Sounds like there may have been other men in the equation. Difficult to tell, though. Now, going into this, I probably should have told you the text has its problems. The book of the Natsarim. It's not a perfect text. Everybody I have so far spoken with has agreed that this passage, what we just read, and this one alone, though none other found in the whole of the book, contradicts what we find in the Torah. I am not so certain of that, though. I may be wrong and am most willing to be. At the very least, the case has been attempted on my part. Clarification, if you will. The Torah doesn't explicitly outlaw sex before marriage. Some will totally disagree with me on that. But that doesn't mean it approves of it either. Nor is Yahusha attributing this sort of behavior to a holy lifestyle. Let me clarify this. My understanding of sex in the Torah, I guess I should have put a little parental warning out here. This is, big boy and big girl talk tonight. Sex in the Torah is a holy act. I mean, my reading of it, I come to that conclusion. It's not explicitly outlawed outside of marriage, but it is not the behavior of a righteous person, if that makes any sense. If you want to be a righteous person, living a holy lifestyle, you keep within the parameters of marriage. Feel free to, or feel free. Oh yeah, let me just add too that if you read the translation that Adam Fink of Parable of the Vineyard put out, which is the one I'm quoting from, he actually puts right under this very conversation between Miriam of Migdal and Yahushua Mashiach. He puts under his notes that he says this is the one passage he believes was added to at a later time, that it's not original to the text. Which that may be. I'm of the mind that it probably is original. And I think that if sometimes we read something we don't like to hear, and we just like, oh, well, I'm not going to wrestle with that. I'm just going to toss that out. But it may not be saying exactly what we think it's saying, or perhaps maybe our understanding of the Torah is a little bit off, and Yahushua's clarifying it. Just to put that out there. All right. Feel free to pull out the Magnum and drill bullets into my rectification process. It just seems to me that we needn't demand that text has been tampered with whenever something comes along that challenges our thinking. That wasn't, by the way, a stab at anybody else. If anybody, it's up to each person to evaluate these texts and see if it's been tampered with or not. Assuming the objectors are correct, and the scribes have had their way with this one, is it indeed not ironic, then, that Miriam of Migdal alone receives this sort of treatment? Something to think about. Again, though, I am holding out that what we are given is legitimate, though wildly misunderstood, and can be further expounded upon in other areas. I intend to do just that when dipping into the Gnostic text, which I'll be talking about tonight. Oh yes, we're going there, eventually, or rather sooner rather than later. Continuing. We're back in the book of the Natsarim, chapter 19. Miriam said, "Sire, I have been a sinner, but have not sinned this last year. Nor shall I again. Should I love once more? I will not now claim the rights of marriage, which I once repudiated." Before commenting upon Miriam's response, I feel like we need to back the trolley up one verse prior, so as to review Yahushua's side of the conversation, particularly the statement, "Only should you now seek marriage, saying, though I love you too, now I have my price." And the key there is, now I have my price. "Would you be doing wrong? This being committed against Elohim, love, and your husband." Mashiach isn't saying marriage is no longer permissible for her. Read it carefully. Miriam is hoping to rectify her past situation. Yahushua is therefore clarifying that she has forsaken the bride price. To demand one is to commit wrong against her husband. Say that again. Her husband. She is seeking out a husband. Which husband are we talking about? It can't be the Roman centurion or any of the others potential bachelors, because she's never been married before. The husband she speaks of is the one whom she hopes to marry. Why are they even having this conversation? Miriam's sister is there. Her brother Eliezer is most certainly accounted for, though Miriam might be off doing the dishes, you never know. Her father is probably gasping for breath or clutching his heart on the other side of the table. The ever-busy Martha might, I just said this, I'm always ahead of myself. The ever-busy Martha might even be holding out a paper bag so that he can hyperventilate into it. Actually, that line's a lot better than what I came up with before. The entire scenario is going down in the very four walls and roof, which she was no longer welcome under. I might as well snap a picture and then frame it for you. Miriam of Migdal has cracked open the bottle of nard. She then anointed Yahushua's feet with her hair in front of his entourage and her family, mind you. And now they're having the love and marriage announcement for all to hear. Why are you still fighting this? Is it really so difficult to fathom that Yahushua would take a woman? Getting back to Miriam's response, verse 10. Instead of making you flip back through the paper, I'll write it out for you again. Miriam said, starting at verse 10, we'll be reading through 11 again. Sire, I have been a sinner, but have not sinned this last year, nor shall I again. Should I love once more, I will not now claim the rights of marriage which I once repudiated. Yahusha said, love is a blending of Ruachoth and not a union of flesh. Woe to those whose love compounds discord in the place where love is fulfilled. If these things confound you, read the books of wisdom. Book of the Natsarim, chapter 19, 10 through 11. She confesses to having sinned with the Roman centurion and potentially with any number of others, but it hasn't happened at any time during the last year. Year. The length of betrothal between a bride and her groomsmen. Are you reading this? She has reserved her heart for Yahusha and has arrived to make that fact known. Another thing she has done is to clear her name. The entire adultery episode in the street was perpetrated by the temple crew, and she's off the hook. And then look at what follows. Miriam states, should I love once more, I will not now claim the rights of marriage which I repudiated. Marriage vows. That's what we're dealing with here. She's not talking about a marriage merely designed of the flesh either. Some may be confused on that point. The other men were that to her, fornication of the flesh. Lots of people have those. No, she's talking about a marriage of the Ruach. Two Ruachoth becoming one. That much is evident in Yahusha's response. Love is a blending of Ruachoth and not a union of flesh. Those are his words, not mine. I suspect they are also included in his marriage vows. All right, the next section, the woman at the well and the marriage of Ruachoth. So I'll be going into a deeper explanation, hopefully, on the marriage of Ruachoth, if anyone has any questions on what that looks like. I think this is beautiful. I love this. This is really exciting. My wife, Sarah, and I, and because we've had that question for years, like, what happens when we die? We're just done? We're going to be in heaven and be like, yeah, I used to know you at one time. And, you kind of say hi to them as you cross the street, every decade or so, whatever. But not so, according to this book. So really, I would not be in the least bit surprised if the woman at the well and Miriam of Magdalene did end up being the same person, nor would I be the first to make such a claim. Alas, they are not, despite the frequent double take. So I am not saying the woman at the well is Miriam of Magdalene. I'm just saying I wouldn't be surprised if they were. Though their stories were intended to complement each other, and I intend to show it. First and foremost, the woman at the well was obviously unaware, descended from the northern tribes of Yasharel rather than the Yahudim. We are often told the Yahudim hated them so because they had interbred with the Persians during their dispersion hundreds of years earlier. But the truth of the matter is that they considered the Yerushalayim temple as well as the Levitical priesthood illegitimate. And that wouldn't go over well. The woman at the well was later baptized by the apostles and given the name Fatin of Samaria, according to her Eastern biography. This is the official narrative, which means Fatin, it means the enlightened one of Samaria. Sometime in the early to mid-60s, the matriarch is said to have moved her family to Carthage, that's in Africa, only to die a martyr during Emperor Nero's worldwide shakedown in 66 AD. So again, I would probably be getting my wires crossed if I identified them as the same person, but you never really know. You may be wondering why I'm making a deal about Yahusha meeting the Samaritan woman at the well to begin with. Because he met her at a well of all places. Are you even faintly familiar with how many Hebrew men met their Shebrew women at a watering well? The list is too long to copy down and comment upon for this intended exercise, though I will list off some of them off for you. Eliezer sought a wife for Yitzchak and found Rivka at a well in Haran, Bereshith 24. Abraham met Keturah at the well of Shiva, Bereshith 25. I put Bereshith 25 there twice. That must be a Rivka effect. After the death of Sarah, Beersheba 25, Rivka effect. Yaakov met Rachel at a well in Beersheba 29. Moshe met Zipporah at a well in Midian in Shemoth, or Exodus 24. Ruth and Boaz have the same story as the rest of them. They too met at a well. There are probably others. It just seems as though the well was the happening place to be as it pertains to boys and girls in the Hebrew courting process. It certainly doesn't help that the conversation between Yahusha and the woman focus upon her sexual history, leading some to silently speculate that a betrothal was being discussed. I mean, it's not like the disciples were shocked at Yahusha speaking with a woman at the boulangerie or the kosher deli. Those incidents probably couldn't be avoided and were likewise never recorded because it is the watering hole which holds connotations rather than the others. Another thing I needn't do is rehearse the entire story. Unless you have been living under a rock, then you are likely familiar with their encounter. A snippet will do. The incident lands only 2 chapters after the betrothal ceremony in Galilee, between the bride and groom, who I believe is Yahusha and Miriam of Magdalene. You can refer back to my first presentation on that, telling us that Yochanan had a certain theme in mind, though water was certainly one of them. The other was marriage. Well, here is the part where marriage and water encounter their crossroads. This is the Gospel of John, chapter 4, verses 15 through 17, through 18. 15 through 18. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water that I thirst not, neither come hither to draw. Yahusha said unto her, Go, call your man and come hither. The woman answered and said, I have no man. Yahusha said unto her, You have well said, I have no man, for you have had 5 men, and he whom you now have is not your man. And that said you truly. Though it is possible that she experienced widowhood on 5 separate occasions, the mere fact that she had ventured to the well by her lonesome screams the far more plausible scenario to the reader. The Samaritan woman was outright rejected by most, if not every last one of them. The 6th wouldn't even marry her, but that may be explained in the 5th putting her away rather than handing a bill of divorce, thereby leading her down the road of an adulterous relationship. Then again, there is a possibility that she became a concubine on the last go-around. Not much else is made of Yahusha's revelation other than the woman understanding him to be a prophet. It furthermore only lands in the lap of Yochanan's Besorah, canonically speaking, which is important in and of itself to the overall narrative before us. There is more to their encounter, though, depending on which gospel you read. The woman at the well shows up again in the book of the Natsarim. Follow this through to the end, and it will swing us right around to where we last left off in the Miriam of Magdalene situation. So this is from the book of the Natsarim, chapter 6, which we'll probably read tonight. Maybe we'll get that far. The woman said to Yahusha, Let me have this water you talk about, so I am freed from the necessity of drawing water. Yahusha said, It would be best if you went and brought your husband, for 2 may understand better than 1. She answered, But I have no husband. And Yahusha said, In this you have at any rate spoken true, for though you married 5 times, you now live with one who is not your husband. Same story, different gospel. A near word-for-word rendition as well, so far. You have to keep reading to see how the woman's 5 marriages, and some change, are expounded upon. The woman leaves in the usual manner, telling everyone about the prophet who approached her at the well. To be fair, you have to wonder how many Samaritans thought the same thing about a betrothal. But I'm getting distracted. Read further on. The disciples then stand around asking questions. Typically, I would say it's the usual fare, except look at what one of those questions happens to be. The one who had remained with Yahusha said, Master, I am puzzled. This woman had many husbands. Tell us which one will be her husband in heaven. Recognize the question? Yeah, me too. Makes me think the 5 husbands might have brothers, and she has no heir. That he has. Oh my goodness, another Rivka effect. Any son born through the 6th man in her life would be deemed a bastard child. So let's keep reading. Yahusha said, In heaven there is neither marriage nor giving in marriage, for there the promises of marriage are fulfilled. To one she must incline more than towards the others. And if he inclines likewise, there is union of the Ruach. But unions of the Ruach may be either weak or strong. Another disciple said, what of he who is not her husband? Yahusha answered him, marriage is not of the flesh, nor made by the words of men. It is of the Ruach. And they who are joined in Ruach and flesh in the sight of Yahuwah, let no man seek to lightly put apart. A marriage wholly of the flesh is fornication, though it be blessed by many priests. Well, if that doesn't take us to a whole new level of wow. Well, that took an unexpected turn. Normally, Yahusha would say there is neither marriage nor giving in marriage in heaven, and then drop a period into the sentence. End of story. Not here, though. The woman at the well has been with 6 men in total, and to only one of them has her heart been inclined, as the union of Ruachoth go. If this is the same woman who married 5 brothers, I'm thinking her Ruach was blended with the first one. That spiritual union is the very reason why she continued on with each of the succeeding brothers. For true love and all that, true love? She wanted an heir in his name rather than the others. It's a Torah thing. What Yahusha is saying, or rather what I believe he is saying, is that the physical act of procreation serves its purpose in our lifetime rather than in heaven, because it is pre-existing souls which need cycled through the womb of the earth. To say till death do we part in a marriage covenant is a true statement, as marriage is a binding act of the flesh. The actual union of Ruachoth, however, which may often be felt during an orgasmic experience, continues on into eternity. I just went there. So long as the man and his woman are truly strong in their spiritual bond. Mashiach has more to say on the matter, much more. Here as well as in other places. I do as well, have more to say in other places, but the bulk of my follow-up will be found when talking about the kiss in the bride chamber, and we'll be talking about that next. This is a journey which cannot be rushed, one thing at a time. So, continuing the book of the Natsarim, this is in chapter 16. Yahusha departed from where he was and moved over to the water in Yehuda across the Yarden, or the Jordan River, and here too crowds gathered about him to hear his message. Many of the usual questions were asked and similar answers given. One man put this question to him, Great teacher, is it lawful according to the great Torah for a man to put away his wife? For there are other laws concerning this. Yahusha said, what did one of the great lawgivers, speaking with the authority of Elohim, say about this matter? The man answered, the Torah he gave permitted a severance deed to be made, and with this the wife is divorced. Yahusha said, such laws are needful while men are without wisdom. I assure you, it will not be so when the rule of Elohim comes. This is speaking of what we know as the 1,000-year reign. They are made for those who cannot overcome differences by compassion and understanding. Where there is no feeling, there cannot be love. Divorce is decreed for the failures in love. Wait, did Yahusha just say what I think he said? The question is over the right to divorce. Yahusha says divorce laws are necessary for men without wisdom. That's a Ruach HaKodesh reference right there, but not what I'm trying to focus upon at the moment. It's in the follow-up. Yahusha says, and I quote, I assure you, it will not be so when the rule of Elohim comes. What will not be so? Divorce? The rule of Elohim is a reference to the kingdom of heaven, but mostly the world to come. Notice what he neglects to say, that man and woman will not be wed. If that were so, then avoiding divorce would be an obvious choice. Nobody would need to make that decision because eternity belongs to bachelorhood. It doesn't, though. There is no divorce under the rule of Elohim because a union of Ruachoth is not failed. Continuing. Since the beginning, there have been male and female, each needing the other for fulfillment and spiritual flowering. For this reason, a man leaves his parents and unites with a woman, so the two become one in flesh and Ruach. The flesh is easily parted, but with the united Ruachoth, it is different. Therefore, when two are joined together in the union of love, let no act of man sever them from each other. Fornication occurs in marriage as well as outside it, for marriage is much more than the union of flesh. And whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery in Ruach against the one who is his true wife. Should a wife divorce her husband and marry another, she too commits spiritual adultery. Marriage has a much greater significance than this depraved generation realizes, for it enters into marriage thoughtlessly and irresponsibly, and then cries, "Loose us from our obligations, for we have failed and cannot stand the bonds of the covenant." After this, the disciple came to Yahusha and said, "Master, enlighten me. If there can be fornication in a marriage blessed by tradition and priest, do a man and woman commit greater fornication if unblessed?" Yahusha said, "Marriage is the blending of two Ruachoth. Fornication is the joining of flesh." This is some deep stuff. Nothing done or not done changes this. But if a man and woman be married in the sight of Yahuwah and not before a priest, let this union not be lightly put apart. For I assure you that no future marriage blessed by priests or otherwise will be a marriage in Ruach. It will be no more than fornication. Just like Yahusha, always say things that turn heads. A decision was made on my part to trudge through the entire dialogue without breaking for commentary, because another disciple, it seems, confessed to the same confusion as most of us, as to all of us, I should say, are presently experiencing. The divorce leading to adultery, which Yahusha is speaking about, is on a spiritual level. Some of you will respond with a "no duh." Is that so? He's not necessarily speaking about the physical. A physical fornicator divorcing another physical fornicator is not the same as a Ruach severing his own Ruachoth in two by way of adultery. Clearly, there are two types of marriages going on here, according to Yahusha's words, not mine. A fleshly one and that of a spiritual nature. It reminds me of Paul's circumcision debate, if anyone is paying attention. I will direct you here to my Romans commentary. I went into a great deal about this. Like the idea that you can be fleshly circumcised, so what? I mean, that is what we are commanded to do, but that doesn't speak that doesn't guarantee that you're spiritually circumcised, right? So it's basically the same thing here. It's like Yahusha saying, yeah, there's a lot of people who get married, but they never get beyond fornication. They have never blended their Ruachoth together. I mean, that's some deep stuff. Many people are outwardly circumcised, but they're still idolaters without the inner mark of Yahuwah. Earthly inquiries are often responded with a heavenly question, as we see here. How many men and women are truly united eternally in Ruachoth? Very few, it seems. My emotional critics will claim permission is being granted for a man to divorce his fornicating wife in pursuit of his quote-unquote soulmate. Wrong. These personal convictions would be following the deception of one's heart. Yahusha is claiming no such thing. He's not telling people to go get divorced. He has already explained that there is adultery being committed when a Ruach divorces the one who is his true wife, despite having convinced himself otherwise. And then reading on the book of the Natsarim, one of the women, Salome, this would be his aunt, Miriam's sister, who had accompanied the disciples. I also believe she's probably John's mother. Let me read this again. One of the women, Salome, who had accompanied the disciples, asked Yahusha, "Is it within the Torah for a man to marry and yet not lie with his wife?" Yahusha answered, "It is never right to live falsely or to dishonor a pledge. Always let whatever be done accord with the intention declared." The book of the Natsarim, chapter 16. Was Miriam Salome asking for herself or for a friend? LOL. Apparently, there was a woman on this earth, though we are presumably never given a name, who never could nab her incoherent husband's attention, no matter how hard she tried, despite standing in front of the television naked during the golf game. Yahusha's response is upfront and reassuring. The intention behind each yes or no is to be honored. If the husband had convinced her that he'd be working overtime to please her, then he should have been a man and followed through with it. The problem with this negligent husband is that he wasn't thinking spiritually enough. And then look at what happens immediately following Yahusha's answer. Miriam Salome goes from a sex question to a kingdom inquiry. It's the perfect setup. Salome said, "Master, when will the rule of Elohim come?" Yahusha replied, "When women place greater value on the treasures they hold, for men will strive harder for gold than for brass. When man and woman cease to pander to the flesh and become truly one in Ruach. For of this I assure you, unless man and woman exalt the Ruach above the flesh, they will not know life and glory." And I wish I had actually quoted the passage from the Gospel of Thomas here, because Yahushua is saying the same thing about becoming a true person. A true person is the Ruach, the state of the Ruach and not the flesh, the inner self. The kingdom is within, right? Even if Miriam Salome's mind has wandered completely away from the intimacy issue, and I'm thinking so, Yahusha hasn't. As I was saying, the perfect setup. Salome asks when the rule of Elohim will come about, and Yahusha uses the negligent husband to explain its absence. Sex was an issue for him, or rather the lack of intimacy, but only because the unspoken couple were not united in Ruachoth. Likewise, the woman who places greater value on the treasure she holds is speaking to the refinement of her Ruach. That is the goal that a man should strive for. The woman's Ruach whenever possible, so long as he is not neglecting his own and vice versa. There are other examples. So basically here is, you guys get it. I mean, the difference between a spirit and flesh. And I really think that the circumcision debate is perfect in this. There are other examples in Book of the Natsarim, and in fact, it seems to be an overlaying theme to it. The heavenly union of Ruachoth, which is why all of this leads us right back to Miriam of Magdalene again. When last left off, she was anointing Mashiach with her hair and speaking of marriage. Do you remember what he said to her? Yahusha said, "Love is a blending of Ruachoth and not a union of flesh." Try not to act surprised when I tell you that Yahushua HaMashiach showed by example how it was done. All right, the next section is, we're on page 88 if you need caught up. The Kiss, the Bride Chamber, and Miriam Migdal. Miriam the Migdal, the Tower. Romantic relationships complicate the workplace. And far as I can tell, the Talmudim weren't always thrilled with the arrangement. I had at some point earlier mentioned that Yahusha and Miriam held conversations together, private ones. Yahusha's desire to speak alone with Miriam and Miriam only before ascending back to the Father is the perfect example of what appears to be an ongoing trend. There were no other witnesses to their garden meeting. The only reason we know about it is because Miriam went and told the Talmudim. And just as a quick reminder, if you didn't happen to, or you just need your memory refresh, if you didn't happen to read or listen to the original presentation, is that the first person he appeared to when he was resurrected was Miriam alone in the garden together. They had an intimate moment together. Still, only Yochanan thought to include their intimate meeting in his gospel, which goes with his theme. The reason why, as I've already shown, seems to continue a developing theme within his narrative flow. It is extra-canonical scripture, however, which informs us that the other Talmudim might have been annoyed by this sort of behavior. And yes, we're going there, to the Gnostic Gospels. You knew we would eventually get to them, though, didn't you? I mean, the Gnostics were all over Miriam of Magdal like poo paws in the honey jar, and I could only hold them off for so long. And anyways, I often see what others say about me on the internet. One supposed reader of my work was going around claiming I was really a secret Gnostic, and that what I needed to do is come clean about it. Actually, that was his Facebook status update that Noel Joshua Hadley is a Gnostic and he found me out. Be forthright and expose myself to humanity. As a Gnostic, that is. A secret one at that. Oh dear, he found me out. I have a hidden gnosis, and I'm not sharing it with my reading audience. Ridiculous. I literally sit here day after day, fleshing out these papers, telling you everything that I know as I learn it, including what I happen to know or not know about the Gnostics. And there's a lot of things I don't know about them. This is the sort of stuff I have to put up with. Since we're on the subject, how many people have even attempted to understand the Gnostics of old? I'm willing to bet Gnosticism held hands with Hebrew mysticism at the time, and Yahusha was clearly a mystic. Perhaps, or presently, I keep a replenished supply of red flags in my pockets with the full intent of planting them in the bums of our Roman controllers whenever and wherever they crop up. Just look at how they villainize the Gnostics. What we know about them comes almost entirely from the very public writings of our controllers. The Roman Catholic Church was at war with them, as well as the Torah of Yahuwah, telling us the stench of propaganda is to be found in the rising smoke. I would much prefer changing those soggy diapers and start out afresh, rather than take a whiff of their offerings and go, refreshing. No, thank you. The fact that they've been scrubbed from his story will require every last flag in your pockets. I should probably start selling them on my website for a nickel a piece, and then I'd be fully capable of sustaining my ministry. Now, I should point out that when we're dealing with the Gnostics, what we do is we categorize them into this one naughty kind of position. When, frankly, the Gnostics had anyone who was classified a Gnostic. They were. If you were classified Gnostic, you were on the outside of the Roman Church. You were thrown out. You were a heretic. There were probably so many different views. I made the mistake in the past of saying, well, they all believed Yahuwah was the Demiurge and all this kind of stuff. And some did. There's some out there who taught that, undoubtedly, and those are the ones they put in the limelight, to scare you off from some of these books. But these books aren't saying that. Anyways, not so long ago in this discussion, I ended up by quoting the part about the Lady Church, that was in my second presentation, whom I heavily insinuated was Miriam Magdalene, that she was coming out of the bride chamber. I'm inclined to suppose the only reason copies of The Shepherd of Hermes survived is because the writer didn't go right out and connect the dots as I have. Or perhaps he was simply being faithful to his visions and didn't know. I think that's probably true with a lot of scripture. They just wrote what they were told to write. They didn't really know what it all meant. Either way, heads would have churned far more than what an owl is capable of. And the lady been identified? Well, it's another connection which I aim to make between Yahusha and Miriam. The bride chamber. There are even other character traits between the lady and Miriam that I have found, in which I hope to point out sometime, one thing at a time, though. And saying that no copies of The Shepherd of Hermes would have likely survived had a connection between the two women been made, I meant it. The only reason we have the Gospel of Miriam, which is highly considered to be a Gnostic text, is because it was dug up in the desert. And even then, pages of that book were scrubbed or torn out. The first 6 pages of the Coptic papyrus have been conveniently, quote-unquote, lost to the sands of time. Wink, wink. I didn't call part 2 of this paper that I'm reading from right now The Forbidden Miriam for nothing. What's funny is that part 1 is also called The Forbidden Miriam. When we are finally granted permission to enter the unraveling narrative, several pages into it, now the context here is the Gospel of Miriam, and this is what we read. Kepha said to Miriam, "Sister, we know that the Savior loved you more than other women. Tell us the words of the Savior which you have in mind, since you know them, and we do not, nor have we heard of them." Now, keep in mind, she's had many intimate moments alone with him. Miriam answered and said, "What is hidden from you, I will impart to you." And she began to say the following words to them. She said, "I saw Adonai in a vision, and I said to him, Adonai, I saw you today in a vision." The Gospel of Miriam. Oh no, did I read that right? Miriam had hidden knowledge. Yahusha told her things privately, like a naughty, I messed that up, like a naughty Gnostic. Not good. One can only wonder what the details are. Shame on them for not sharing their intimate conversations with us. Every juicy detail. Wouldn't you like to know some of it? Good thing Miriam proceeded to tell Kepha and the other Talmudim all that Yahusha showed her in the most recent vision, so that we wouldn't be kept guessing. But then something happens. More pages are torn out. No, I'm not kidding. I wish I could relay to you all that Miriam had to offer to the group, but alas, when the narrative picks back up again, the woman whom Yahusha loved has finished her speech. She's sitting back down again. How very convenient. It's almost like somebody didn't want us listening in. But who am I to make such conclusions? Anywho, here is where we pick up again. When Miriam had said this, she was silent, since the Savior had spoken thus far with her. But Andre, who is Andrew, answered and said to the brethren, "Say what you think concerning what she said, for I do not believe that the Savior said this. For certainly these teachings are of other ideas." Kepha also opposed her in, it's almost like the context here, the way it's ripped out, it's like, ooh, whatever he said, or whatever she said must have been really bad. Kepha also opposed her in regard to these matters and asked them about the Savior. Did he then speak secretly with a woman in preference to us and not openly? Are we to turn back and all listen to her? Did he prefer her to us? Then Miriam grieved and said to Kepha, "My brother Kepha, what do you think? Do you think that I thought this up myself in my heart, or that I am lying concerning the Savior?" Levi answered and said to Kepha, "Kepha, you are always irate. Now I see that you are contending against the woman like the adversaries. But if the Savior made her worthy, who are you to reject her? Surely the Savior knew her very well. For this reason he loved her more than us." The Gospel of Miriam. As you can plainly see, whatever Miriam had to say didn't go over well, mostly. Andre, the brother of Kepha, was the first to speak up, and this is what we learned. He wasn't buying it. Kepha wasn't exactly a fan of her exclusivity either. Whoever took the magic eraser to her words apparently didn't want us making any other judgment call either. Come to think of it, her missing words are probably far more controversial than anything she might have said. If they were truly the words of a false prophet and Miriam commanded that we break Torah, or even insinuate that it was done away with, then you'd think Marcion and the boys down at seminary, as well as the local lodge, would be all over that one. She doesn't, though, and here's why. This also comes from the Gospel of Miriam. Now, I don't put chapters or verse numbers in this because there are none. "Go then and preach the gospel of the kingdom. Do not lay down any rules beyond what I appointed you, and do not give a law like the lawgiver, lest you be constrained by it." That's Yahusha speaking, by the way. He is commanding his Talmudim to go out and about, preparing for the coming kingdom, and reminding them once again how it is to be done. By not laying down any rules beyond what he has already appointed them, and we know what he has told them to do, we know what the boundary line is, and it doesn't extend beyond the Torah. The quip about not giving a law like the lawgiver, lest they be constrained by it, would therefore only be indirectly referencing Moshe. It is the Parashim, the Pharisees, who gave a contrary law like the lawgiver, the Talmud, and they were constrained by it. You see how that works? Good advice if I do say so myself. Keep with Yahuwah's instructions in righteousness. The 613 are enough to keep us all occupied. We are given a clue as to Miriam's gnosis. It is delivered in Levi's response, wherein we first and foremost learn that the Savior made her worthy. What exactly are the qualifying factors of making one woman worthy above even the men of his entourage, or any other woman for that matter? Well, Levi tells us. Surely, he says, the Savior knew her very well. How well? He loved her more than us. Just so all my bros know, I love my wife more than you. Implicit in that exclusivity is his pulling her aside from the others so that he might speak on intimate matters. Kind of sounds like the relationship between my wife and I again when taking my bros into account. But what do I know about marital relationships really? What does anybody know? Also, Yahusha kissed Miriam on the mouth. I'm trying to get back to my original point, which is romance in the workplace. That's what we read about in the Gnostic Gospels. So this one comes from the Gospel of Philip, which, by the way, I think that very likely the writer of the Gospel of Philip, I really think it should be called the Epistle of Philip because it's not really a gospel, it's more like a letter. But I think whoever the writer is of the Gospel of Philip, if it is Philip, is the same writer perhaps of the Book of the Natsarim. It's almost like if you can take the Gospel of John and then slide First John right up to it, and they fit perfectly. Like First John is this great afterthought commentary on the gospel. Well, the Gospel of Philip is some great kind of epistle commentary on the Book of the Natsarim. They fit each other perfectly. They both come from England, by the way. Well, at least the Book of the Natsarim does. The Gospel of Philip is clearly writing to the Druids. So that's England territory. Anyways, this is what it says. As for the wisdom, Sophia, who is called sterile, she is the mother of the angels. The companion, you see a koinonos there. The companion of the Son is Miriam Magdalene, or Miriam Migdal. The teacher loved her more than all the disciples and used to kiss her often on her mouth. When the disciples saw how he loved Miriam, they asked him, "Why do you love her more than all of us?" I mean, did they want to be kissed on the mouth? I don't know. The Savior answered and said to them, "Why do I not love you like her? When a blind man and one who sees are both together in darkness, they are no different from one another. When the light comes, then he who sees will see the light, and he who is blind will remain in darkness." The Gospel of Philip, 55 through 56. A different gospel this time, but he still loved her more than all the others. And as you can clearly see, the Talmudim were not thrilled with the arrangement. You will tell me it doesn't say mouth, as the manuscript is illegible there, and that the translators only decided to claim mouth for feisty purposes. Wrong. If provocative is what they were after, they might have decided upon neck or elbow or left earlobe. You will tell me he was just giving her a kiss on the cheek and that it is perfectly normal between a gentleman knight and a lady of the realm. Well then, let me ask you something. Would you kiss a woman in the Middle East, particularly if she wasn't your wife? Publicly, I mean. There are conveniently placed stones in this scenario. Go ahead and give it a try. UNESCO isn't there to protect you. And even in ancient Yasharel, Torah has strict laws about women in adultery. There is the law of jealousy, the bride price, and all that. As we have already seen, the Parashim never once accused Yahusha of misconduct with a woman, and you know they would have, even by their laws, if given the chance, opportunity. If he's off, kissing a woman in public. Their only complaint involved Miriam being unworthy to be given his affection. And they never accused that of any other woman, interestingly enough. But as I've already shown, that was likely her father who did that. Nobody else came up to them and exclaimed, "Now you stop that." And let's not overlook the immediate context. The disciples were the only ones. They were jealous with the attention which Yahusha gave to Miriam rather than them. If he were merely greeting her with the kiss of a bishop among his clergy, then why were the disciples so insulted? Why would you complain that your pastor kissed a woman on the cheek and not yours? It probably had something to do with the fact that Miriam is also referred to as Yahusha's companion. I decided to add the Greek for your convenience. Koinonos has various meanings, one of which includes marriage partner. But then again, it might be stating that she was his business partner or companion in the faith. Which is it? Don't lose track of the most obvious, that she was his companion. Kissing a business partner, really? The other Talmudim were not described using that term. And I am having a difficult time finding any other example in Scripture which might describe the male-female companion relationship in any other light than a helpmeet. But then don't overlook the starker comparison. It says, wisdom was thought by many to be barren, and yet she was the mother of the angels. In wisdom literature, we come to learn that she is also the mother of Yasharel. That is once again the context here. You might say Yahusha and Miriam held the same office of koinonos as Yahuwah, the Most High Elohim, and the Ruach HaKodesh. The comparison is given. And by the way, the Gospel of Philip is all over the feminine Ruach HaKodesh. I mean, he says the Ruach HaKodesh is feminine, not masculine. I'm just the one reporting upon it. Are we seeing yet another connection between Miriam and the Lady of Hermas? I believe so. The idea behind neshak, which is the Hebrew word for kiss, implies two people breathing together or sharing in the same ruach. This is coming back to the union of Ruachoth. When kissing her on the mouth, Yahusha and Miriam weren't simply exchanging their spiritual breath. They were unifying them into one. Nobody else was kissing Yahusha on the mouth. That is the meaning behind his saying, when the light comes, then he who sees will see the light, and he who is blind will remain in darkness. It was an idiom for marriage. You shall see why I came to that conclusion soon enough. Koinonos therefore gives us a greater depth of understanding as to what was going on in the companion departments. She was his feminine half. She was his Chua, his Eve, to the second Adam. Consider. Okay, so this comes from, again, we're still in the Gospel of Philip. The bridal chamber is not for the animals, nor is it for the slaves, nor for defiled women, but it is for free men and virgins. Through the Ruach HaKodesh we are indeed begotten again, but we are begotten through Messiah in the two. We are anointed through the Ruach. When we were begotten, we were united. None can see himself either in water or in a mirror without light, nor can you see in light without mirror or water. For this reason, it is fitting to baptize in the two, in the light and the water. Now the light is the oil of anointment. Another reference to the light. Sounds important. It is once again being relegated to the restored union of a man with his feminine counterpart in the bridal chamber, as well as baptism. Only here we are fed one more clue. The light of the oil of anointment, something which Miriam and Yahusha would have been familiar with. I will be told by the Gnostic critics that a kiss on the mouth from the Gnostic perspective symbolized the passing of the breath of the spiritual soul, aka knowledge, thereby designating the exchanges between Yahusha and Miriam a strictly exercise rather than carnal. Because the Gnostics were apparently never physical, staying clear of the bridal chamber. No wonder why they died off. They simply went around kissing each other, men and women in public, simply to upset everyone at the implications, which they weren't following through with behind the curtains. That must be it. The passing of gnosis between a man and woman in a kiss is a true statement, but it is only a half-truth. However you hold the knife, reposition the cake and cut it, the lip locks were most certainly intimate, though not carnal, or rather a precursor to the bridal chamber. Difficult to frame that otherwise, even from the Gnostic standpoint. Just as assuredly as sexual intimacy between a man and a woman is a personal gnosis which cannot be known or expressed by anyone else but only felt between the two. You want gnosis? I have just directed you to it. Sex is gnosis, whether you like it or not. Reproduction can be taught in biology class. But the union of Ruachoth, the union of Ruachoth cannot. All right, so let me just say that again for all the people out there. They're like, "Oh, gnosis is evil, and if you have gnosis, that's unbiblical." It's like, no. Sexual intimacy between a man and woman, the union of Ruachoth, is gnosis. Again, you could teach that in biology class. You can try to express to people what that's like. but you cannot know, you cannot have that inner gnosis of what that is like until you experience it. I think everyone here probably knows exactly what I'm talking about. Another great one, uh, another great example is like that moment you hold your child for the first time. You know, you watch the child come out of the womb, and you just pick it up and you hold it, and like you always wondered what it would be like to be a parent, a father, so on and so forth. And you see other people's children, but you can't know. You can't eternalize that until that moment. That is gnosis. That is what it means to be, I guess, a Gnostic. To understand that there are some things spiritually that can only truly be felt. You can't express it otherwise. Anyways, getting back to this, and then we read filth like this. The sexual act is itself so shameful as to be intrinsically bad, Pope Innocent III. It's funny, his name is Pope Innocent. I just caught that. Apparently, Pope Innocent III was no friend of Gnosis. And also, a conversation about Messiah and the bridal chamber would never be complete without the God created man, and then Satan came along and slapped on the genitals crowd. They're everywhere, driving our subconscious. They hold a creator who is either incapable or unwilling to procreate at the forefront of their theology, and, though clearly holding the monopoly, claim to have the only and final word on the matter. Meanwhile, at this very minute, I witnessed 2 dragonflies having sex. I actually wrote this in Missouri. I was sitting by a lake, and I was literally writing this in my notepad, and these 2 dragonflies fell on my lap having sex. And just this morning, the ducks were going at it. That was also true. It was actually awful the way they would treat the female ducks. My wife is nearly 40 weeks pregnant. So as you can see at this point here, when I wrote this, Rivka was not yet born. More proof sex is everywhere. The world would cease regenerating without intercourse. I would even argue that it wouldn't have existed in the first place without it. Satan created nothing. After releasing the first draft of this paper, I was told that Yahusha could not possibly be Messiah if he had a wife. Chapter and verse, please. Chapter and verse. As if Yahusha was any less holy for doing or planning to do exactly what Adam and Chua were instructed to by their Heavenly Father. Yahusha, if I'm not mistaken, became the second Adam. But that's probably just a coincidence. Either he was human or he wasn't. The Trinitarian crowd will claim he was 100% human, but that he couldn't possibly have had sex because it would then be a conflict of interest with his being 100% triune. Well, which is it? To claim he was any less holy or subhuman for taking a woman into his bedchamber only serves to reveal the Satan stiffened my penis argument, when in fact the complete opposite is deemed true. Sex is holy when done right. I'm only getting started, though. The Gospel of Philip finds its core in the bridal chamber. This comes from 122. No one can know when the husband and the wife have intercourse with one another, except the 2 of them. Indeed, marriage in the world is a mystery for those who have taken a wife. If there is a hidden quality to the marriage of defilement, how much more is the undefiled marriage a true mystery? Are you starting to see how this lines up with the book of the Natsarim? It is not fleshly, but pure. It belongs not to desire, but to the will. It belongs not to the darkness or the night, but to the day and the light. Boom, there it is. This is precisely how Yahusha referred to his kiss with Miriam. If you recall, they were in the light. Only a blind man could stand in the light and fail to see it. Does that quote make more sense to you now? Here, Philip describes 2 sorts of marriages, those of defilements and of the world, which is in itself a mystery. But then there are those which are undefiled and so much more a mystery. Continuing. If a marriage is open to the public in the light of day, it has become prostitution, and the bride plays the harlot not only when she receives the seed of her man outside of their bedroom, but even if she slips out of her bedroom and is seen. Let her show herself naked only to her father and her mother, and to the friend of the betrothed and the children of the bride chamber. These are permitted to enter into the bridal chamber. Others cannot hear the voice of the lover and the beloved, nor breathe their perfume. Wow, that's intimate. Very descriptive. That is where the kiss leads to, in case you were wondering. The bridal chamber. The embrace which unites the feminine and the masculine into one breathing ruach inevitably ends up there. It is a gnosis which would be relegated to spiritual harlotry if anyone else except the two united halves would experience or know. There are others permitted into the bridal chamber, of course. The father and the mother of the bride may enter, as well as the friend of the betrothed and the produce of their union, but I'm gathering very few. This is like what he just kind of described there, that scene. It's kind of interesting because it probably takes us back to maybe how sexual intercourse was experienced a little bit more thousands of years ago, when you had more intimate housing. A good example of this would be like a woman's hair, right? A woman never let her hair down in public. That would be considered being a harlot. But if she were in her own household, she could let her hair down and her children could see it. It's okay for her children in her household to see her hair down, like it says here, but not out on the street. That would be harlotry. And of course, it's still like that in the Middle East to this day. What is the voice of the lover and the beloved exactly but the two joined in the bridal chamber, breathing heavily together? Do I need to replicate the sound of a climax for you? Even at a whisper, it can be heard from short distances. If you think others being permitted to listen in is perverse, have you observed the layout or perchance ventured into nearly any home outside of modern Western civilization? Depending upon one's financial prowess, the marriage bed might be positioned in the same room as the bed of others. Sometimes a curtain may apply, but if not, roommates were expected to turn their heads and shut their eyes, but not before first growing up. Also, why it is vital that only the inner circle be allowed into the bridal chamber. Don't miss out on the last part. Only those invited in can breathe their perfume. There is another nard connection for you. Without skipping a beat, the fragrance is once again connected with sexual arousal. When Miriam anointed Yahusha, the house of Simon was filled with its ointment, but only Yahusha's entourage and her family were there to experience it. The betrothment of Yahusha with Miriam had been hidden from nearly everyone, even from many of us who were invited to read about it. Again, from the Gospel of Philip, we read, "And the Holy of Holies is the bridal chamber. Trust and consciousness in the embrace are exalted above all. Those who truly pray to Jerusalem are to be found only in the Holy of Holies, the bridal chamber." Philip writes it twice, hoping to drive his point home. The Holy of Holies is the bridal chamber, and in case you missed it, the Holy of Holies is the bridal chamber. And it only makes sense that it would be. If done right, then it is strictly in the light of the bridal chamber, where we create another living soul in our likeness. And there is nothing filthy or sinful or subhuman in that. In other news, the Holy of Holies is the holiest place on earth. The Ruach HaKodesh does not hide her face from it. And certainly, Satan did not custom design an ornament or two, despite inner guilt which might demand otherwise. Miriam was invited into it, and why wouldn't she be? Don't get hung up on the number of people who reject any notion of their betrothal, Yahusha's and Miriam's, because really, it's not for everyone. How many Levite priests do you suppose were invited into the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem? Very few. Why should it be any different for those who are trusted with the mysteries of heaven? Here is what Solomon says on these matters. "It is the glory of Elohim to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings is to search out a matter. The heavens for height, and the earth for depth, and the heart of kings is unsearchable." Proverbs 25, 2-3. Yahusha has secrets, as he is not in the habit of casting pearls before swine. I am not saying you're the swine. If you fail to see what has become so obvious to me during the course of this investigation, then perhaps you are simply not ready nor willing to accept this particular mystery. I couldn't say either way. Contrarily, I may simply be wrong about everything so far discussed. I am most willing to be. I just don't see that as the case. I claim you can't see it, and you claim the same as me. And now we can be friends. What I do know for certain is that the swine would, and indeed have, stomped all over this one, given the opportunity. I will remind you again of her harlotry according to Roman Catholicism. Talk about calling the kettle black. Most recently, the people attempting to push Miriam of Migdol as the bride of Yahusha into the foray have no love for Yahuwah's set-apart ways, by their own admission. Nearly just as many don't even believe Scripture to be true, from what I found. Those who are pushing Miriam to be the bride. What are they so pressed? I should say, why are they so pressed on doing it then? If Yahusha isn't the only begotten son of Elohim, high priest and king over humanity, and he's just some dude who was crucified by the Romans, then what does any of this matter? It wouldn't matter, but it does, because Yahusha is the living son of Elohim, and everything he says or does is modeled after our Father in heaven. That is why it is the honor of kings to search out what Yahuwah has hidden. And in matters such as this one, discretion is key. All right, that was a lot in that one, and I think I'll make this within the 2 hours that I originally hoped. The next section, if you need caught up, is on page 100, where Joseph of Arimathea comes into this. Britain was the place to go, apparently, but Miriam of Migdol didn't want to end up there. France was her cup of tea. Supposing you've read my report on the cities of the Millennial Kingdom, then you will know there was a concentrated effort to bring Messiah's Bezorah, his gospel, to the lost kingdom of Yasharel, which had been established by the prophet Yirmiyahu, that'd be Jeremiah, and was waiting to blossom along the shoreline. Many of the apostles, as well as the 70, arrived there, one of which was Aristobulus, Kepha's father-in-law. Marcus was Kepha's traveling companion, and he married a woman from the Isles. There are others, including Philip and Simon, and we, of course, talk. I will do what I can to show the Joseph and Miriam of Migdol connection. There are, however, some biographical tidbits of information which I have gathered over the years regarding Joseph, that is, and they're worth mentioning. All right, so this one comes from the book of the Natsarim. Now, one of the elders of the Supreme Council was a man named Josias, called Joseph of Arimathea, son of Joachim, son of Nathan, son of Eliezer, son of Eliahu, son of Joachim, son of Zadok, who lived on the Merchant's Road, a day's journey from Yerushalayim. He also owned an estate northwest of the city. He had a brother-in-law named Nicodemus, so that's interesting to see that they're related, and both were secret followers of Yahusha. Joseph of Arimathea, the wise commander, had been present at the council when it sat in judgment on Yahusha, and he supported him, but many more who could have done so were absent because of the hour. The book of the Natsarim 21:7. Also, I have pointed out that basically everyone mentioned in the Gospels are like all related to Yahusha. So it's interesting if Joseph of Arimathea is his great uncle, and then Nicodemus is his brother-in-law, that means Nicodemus is also in Yahusha's family. Just think about that. His brother-in-law was Nicodemus, and they were both elders of the Supreme Council. It doesn't say it here, but Nicodemus was likewise present and accounted for when the Sanhedrin sat in judgment over Yahusha, just as Joseph was. So there's that. Another thing about him is that he was rich and affluential. It doesn't outright say that here, but come on, how else do you land in the lap of the Sanhedrin? The other giveaway is his living in two separate locations. One on the Merchant's Road, a day's journey from Yerushalayim, and then in another estate northwest of the city. Kind of paints the picture, don't you think? The garden tomb, which Joseph had originally intended to bury himself in, also happens to be located northwest of the city. I'm guessing they're not the same location, though. The following passage helps to explain why. So this comes from Luke 23. And behold, there was a man named Joseph, a counselor, and he was a good man and a just. The same had not consented to the counsel and deed of them. He was of Ramah, a city of the Yahudim, who also himself waited for the kingdom of Elohim. Very few people seem to know where Arimathea is, and to the point that some claim it to be a mythical city. The Sefer, which I just read from, goes ahead and gives the town its Hebrew correct title. Ramah is located some 8 kilometers or 8 miles northwest of Yerushalayim. That would be the earlier mentioned estate northwest of the city. 5 miles is quite the commute, though. Yosef would have probably needed an additional apartment in Yerushalayim to avoid rush hour traffic. Ramah is where Samuel or Shemuel, the prophet, was born, as well as the location where Yirmiyahu gathered with the Yahudim after Babylon destroyed Yerushalayim. Same city. That second mentioned fact may not be a coincidence. I have already taken you through the uprooting and planting process, which Yirmiyahu was a part of. Not going through all of that again. And then here's the link here if you need to, in case you missed it, a couple of pages ago. Ramah was a strategic location where the rod of kingship was eventually passed over to Britain on 2 separate locations. Yirmiyahu was the first, and Joseph of Ramah would be the second. I have always wondered why Joseph was given a city for a name title, but now we are given a possible reason. I simply didn't latch onto the significance of that city then. The same passage also informs us that Joseph is one of the few people mentioned in the New Testament who is called righteous. Of course, the Sefer just calls him just, but it's the same thing. Yes, righteous. I counted 8 names in total in the New Testament. That number includes Joseph, the father of Yahusha, as well as Yahusha. So that's 2 right there. You got 6 left. But as you can see here, Lucas 2350 calls him just, which is the exact same thing as righteous. Not bad considering he kept company with the Sanhedrin. Another fun fact is that Joseph of Arimathea was Yahusha's great uncle through Miriam, his mother, and so it only makes sense that he would pull her away to safety. Miriam of Magdalene. You don't have to take my word on his relations and can look that up for yourself among the ancient historians. There are actually quite a few claims which I am unable to substantiate at this time. Here are a few of them. Joseph was born in Arimathea, Ramah in 41 BC, dying in 45 AD, at the age of 86 in Glastonbury, England. He made his fortune in the tin trade. At the time, England was the largest producer of tin mining, though the business went well beyond the Mediterranean, stretching all the way across the Atlantic to South America. Joseph very likely had a hand in all of that. I will get to that part where Joseph ended up in Britain. We have records on that. What I haven't been able to get a good fix on is his earlier residences in Britain, as well as the claim that Yahusha traveled there with him in his youth. Chariots of Fire is a movie I haven't watched in a really long time. The 1980s, if we're keeping a proper accounting. I was young and can't remember the overall plot, but do distinctly recall the beach running sequence in its openings, as well as lots and lots of running in other places. None of that is probably important to the conversation. The Vangelis soundtrack, however, is. I do confess to owning a few copies on vinyl. Yes, a few. They have been set down upon the turntable often, and it has been that way in my household for any number of years. There is a track on that album, Chariots of Fire, containing a church organ and lyrics sung by a choir, which has long held my interest. Jerusalem is the name of it. The words recited within the song goes as follows. And did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountain green? And was the holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen? And did the countenance divine shine forth upon our clouded hills? And was Jerusalem builded there, or here, among those dark satanic mills? Bring me my bow of burning gold. Bring me my arrows of desire. Bring me my spear, O clouds unfold. Bring me my chariots of fire. That's where you get the title in the movie. I will not cease from mental fight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. The song begins with a question. In the instance that the listener is slow to latch onto whose feet is being implicated as having walked England's mountain green, the singers quickly rephrase their question into something more descriptive. The Holy Lamb of Elohim, who was on England's pleasant pastures, seen as none other than Yahushua Mashiach, the Messiah. We are often told this is a reference to his having traveled there as a boy, but I am not so certain about that. The next proposal by the choir has us pondering if his divine countenance ever shine forth upon them clouded hills. That may be a childhood reference, but if I had to choose one or the other, I'd go with a resurrected Yahusha. The reason being is that we are then asked if Yerushalayim was built there, among its dark satanic hills. Say, what? How does the building of a city in any way relate to a teenager traveling around with great uncle Yosef and the wealthy tin trade? Or the wealthy tin trader? It doesn't. The songwriter is toying with us. He seems to be implying that Yerushalayim was there until it wasn't, and that they could resolve to bring it back what was lost to them again. That's a once and future king reference if you hadn't noticed. I am thinking Britain was the reestablished kingdom of Yasharel upon the earth and the epicenter of the 1,000-year reign. It's all told to us in the song, but nobody seems to be paying attention. Again, this all goes back to Miriam of Migdol and why her arrival in Britain rather than France is so important to the narrative. France isn't a deal breaker by any means. I just think she went further than what we are told, and I'm about to get into it. Retracing Yosef of Ramah's steps again, this is what we read. In the year 8036, the party of Joseph of Arimathea and those who went with him into exile was put out to sea in a vessel without sails or oars. This vessel drifted and finally reached Massilia, where they were saved. From Massilia, Joseph and his company passed into Britain and after preaching the gospel there died. This comes from Baronius' Ecclesiastical Annals. Baronius writes a passage having nothing to do with Miriam of Migdol, seemingly, but only to the untrained eye. It says Joseph of Ramah went into exile with a party of others, presumably the people of his household. Well, Miriam of Migdol was a member of his household. We simply haven't gotten there quite yet. Place a bookmark on the 36 AD date. But then look at where Joseph of Ramah ended up. Massilia is a city on the southern coastline of France. And so, what is said regarding Miriam of Migdol is ultimately true. She did go to France. If only I could find a reference, any reference really, to a northbound journey across the English Channel to the White Cliffs of Dover and beyond, but so far I got nothing. Let's keep trying, though. Here is what we read regarding Miriam of Migdol's journey. There was that time with the apostles, Saint Maximin, which was one of the 72 disciples of our Adonai, to whom the blessed Mary Magdalene was committed by Saint Peter. And then when the disciples were departed, Saint Maximin, Mary Magdalene, and Lazarus her brother, or Eliezer, Martha her sister, so there's that Mary-Martha connection, Marcel, Chamber of Martha, and Saint Sidoni, which was born blind, and after illumined of our Adonai, all these together and many other Christian men were taken of the miscreants and put in a ship in the sea without any tackle or rudder for to be drowned. But by the purveyance of Almighty Deus, or God, or Elohim, they came all to Marcellus, the golden legend Mary Magdalene. Well, that's strange. Miriam of Migdol was put out to sea in a ship without any rudder and oars or any other sailing devices. Didn't the exact same thing happen to Joseph of Ramah as well? He's certainly not mentioned in the party. Therefore, I guess we'll have to chalk it up to another coincidence. But wait, it says she ended up in Marseille as well. I'm probably pronouncing the name of that town wrong, but you guys know how I am with French. I checked. The distance from the port of Haifa to the port of Marseille is 1942 nautical miles. 1942. Am I supposed to expect that separate parties of people were punished for being naughty, sent out to sea, and all landed in the exact same location, but on two separate occasions? Nobody really knows who Maximin is, though he is traditionally named as the builder of the first church on the site of the present, I guess it's AIX Cathedral. I'm not even going to try. Aix? I don't even know how to pronounce that. His wiki article is slim enough to be well beyond anorexic in suspicion. He lived and presumably died, but that is about all. The Golden Legend claims he was one of the 70, but then so was Joseph of Arimathea. It says 72, we'll let that slide. Accompanying Maximum and Miriam were also Miriam's sister Martha, as well as their brother Eliezer, and somebody named Sidoni. Looks like the entire family. All we are told now, I'm not going to read this here. This is a clipping from Wikipedia. You need a magnifying glass to look at that thing. All we are told by the Roman Catholic officials is that Maximin had Miriam of Migdol under his care until he didn't, which is highly suspect. I'm not saying Maximin wasn't a real individual. Then again, that's kind of what I'm saying. That he and Joseph of Ramah are the same person. Wouldn't surprise me in the least. Plenty of people went by different names back then. The only other connection I can think of is a close family member, either on Miriam and Martha's side or Yahusha's. Here is what we so far have. Maximin and his party were sent from Yehuda to France in an oarless vessel, but then so was Joseph of Ramah and his party. The only difference between the two is that Maximin is listed as having Miriam under his care, whereas Joseph of Ramah is not, so far. The other difference is that Joseph doesn't stay in the south of France. No, Baronius has him traveling even further north to Britain. This will take further digging. The sources we have make it out like Joseph of Ramah and Miriam of Migdol arrived in France by complete accident. That may be so. I couldn't really say. It would certainly be ironic that the tide sent Joseph of all people right back towards the home of his origin. Know that I am not putting the adrift at sea story into doubt, when in fact Yahuwah Elohim had already told him in advance where he was to go. So this comes from the Britain book, which is another one of the texts where we get the book of the Natsarim, just so you know. It's one of the accompanying texts. Joseph said, "Know this, great king, I am a servant of the great Elohim of light." He's speaking to a Druidic king, I believe. "I am sent in order to build a church here, where it will serve your people well. I will establish a place of light unto them. I come to teach the perfect commandments." That's interesting. That's the Torah. "Ask among your own about me, for I am not unknown to them." I have no. So he's not unknown. They've seen him before there. "I have no human teacher, for whom I learned the wisdom from where I got these things. I lived in the light of Christ, or Mashiach, but learned tardily. Then I had a message from Elohim himself. Go preach to those who dwell at the edge of the earth." The book of Britain 4:22. Telling Joseph to go and preach to those who dwell at the edge of the earth was the same thing as saying return to his homeland. Notice how he didn't arrive in Deutschland or Norway or even China or India for that matter. No, he went to his homeland, which will be expounded upon hereafter. The why is a good question. And by that I mean why Miriam of Migdol was chosen to journey there with him. Joseph's fate is again expounded upon in the book of the Natsarim. It is thought that Joseph may have actually written the book, though I am more inclined to conclude that Aristobulus and maybe even Philip had a heavy hand in it. For starters, the writer of Natsarim appears to have been a disciple of Yochanan the Baptist before his introduction to Mashiach, and secondly, had intimate knowledge of Kepha's household in Galilee. Aristobulus can be traced to both, as his two sons were recognized disciples of Yochanan, and he was head of the mentioned household. But then, thirdly, the Gospel of Philip comes across like written commentary upon the narrative in Natsarim. I'm not completely sure who the author is, but that's unimportant. Here is what we learn regarding the fate of Joseph. And so this is quoting from the book of the Natsarim again, chapter 21. "Despite his authority, there was evidence against Joseph, and he was in prison being kept under a constant guard." We read that same story in the Gospel of Nicodemus, by the way. "One Shabbat during the night hours, the Ruach of Yahusha was projected to Joseph, so he was comforted. But the guards, seeing it, fainted with fear. Then Joseph was brought before Pontius Pilate, but the governor found no fault in him, and he was released." And that all goes, that same story is told in the Gospel of Nicodemus. I love that reference. "Later, Annas and his son-in-law, who were then the high priests of the Yahudim, came to the house of Joseph, bringing with them the holy books written on scrolls within their box. They requested that he swear upon it in the sacred name of Elohim, but he made oath only that he had done no wrong or broken no law. The wise commander remained in his house for many days, after which he went about undisturbed." So he was thrown into prison, Not that it helps us much in this discussion, but it lines up quite nicely, as I mentioned, with the Gospel of Nicodemus, because the exact same incident happened to him there. In the same book, Annas and Caiaphas discovered that Yahusha had proclaimed himself Mashiach in the year 5500. We see an investigation played out here, though their conclusions are not shown. It is Annas and Caiaphas and their conspirators, I believe, who began the processing of the process of corrupting the dates into what has become the Masoretic timeline. That's a whole other story, though, despite the fact that it all connects with the 1,000-year reign discussion. Jumping ahead to the next verse. Then, when Pontius Pilate returned to Rome, Joseph departed from his home shores, coming to Set Nadoin, from whence he moved to a well at the foot of a hill. He brought with him a clay cup, which had been set in silver by a silversmith, and this was the cup used by Yahusha. Pontius Pilate returned to Rome. He is generally thought to have bowed out in 37 AD, though, as we have already seen, Baronius thought it was 1 year earlier in 36 AD. The reason why Joseph was deported immediately after Pilate's parting relies upon the fact that they were friends. I also suspect that Pilate became a convert. At any rate, Joseph was placed under Pilate's protection, and the Sanhedrin wanted their revenge. It's why the boat story and placing Miriam under his care or a member of his household makes the most sense. The place called Set Nadoin was a location known to the author, though is apparently no longer identifiable. Even Microsoft Word doesn't recognize the spelling and wants to autocorrect, but I won't let it. Believe it or not, his move to a well at the foot of a hill is all we need to identify Glastonbury. There is probably a well at the foot of a hill in hundreds, if not thousands, of locations across this realm, and so you're probably wondering how I came to that conclusion. It's in the preface of the book. A scribe who wrote Natsarim, the book of Natsarim, had this to say about Joseph of Arimathea Rama. When Elid, our father in the faith, came in full flight from afar, seeking refuge beyond the confines of his prosecutor's dominion, he set his collystone in Lanavalok. Here, when he spoke to them, the Druthin said, "We have never been without the light of truth, yet you seek to bring another light, strange to us, which seems less bright than ours." And I just put there the Gospel of Calliope 2:1. Don't make me lay out even more breadcrumbs for you. Elid is Joseph of Arimathea Rama. You can take my word for it or purchase your own copy and compile hours of research. In other places, he is referred to as Joseph Idowin, the father of their faith. The land is in Lanavalok, refers to a sacred enclosure, and Avalok, as you shall soon see, is the name of the king in his kingdom, whom Joseph of Arimathea Rama was directly related to. And it says in the Britain book 521, Joseph Idowin was related to Avalok, whose kingdom bordered that of Arviragus through Anna the Unfaithful. He converted Claudia Rufina, who's that? The daughter of Caridu, previously called Gladys, who married Pudens, a Roman, and had a daughter, Pudentia. That you guys should be directed to one of Paul's letters on that. There are some recognizable names from Paul's epistles to the Romans, if I have ever seen them. I refuse to get distracted, though. Joseph was of a royal descent through this Avalok fellow. Very likely the kingdom of Yasharel established in these parts by Yirmiyahu. Avalok. Say it again. Avalok. Once more. Avalon. Not a typo. I spelled it right the first time. Avalon. Joseph Idowin of Arimathea Rama was descended from the kingdom of Avalon. It's most certainly where he settled. And then Melgwyn of Llandaff, the uncle of Saint David, the Welsh bishop of Menu, a lot of Welsh names in this, says the same thing. Joseph of Arimathea, the noble decurion, received his everlasting rest with his 11 associates in the Isle of Avalon. He lies in the southern angle of the bifurcated line of the Oratorium of the Adorable Virgin. He has with him the 2 white vessels of silver, which were filled with the blood and the sweat of the great prophet Yahusha. And now for the mention which you thought I was snubbing, the Holy Grail. I wasn't snubbing anything. There are simply too many details in these small quotes to cover. I am attempting to establish Glastonbury with Avalon and any other number of small but important details. I probably overlooked several already. As a reminder, we are on a quest for Miriam of Migdol, and no, I am not suggesting for you that she and the Holy Grail nor some son or daughter of Yahushua HaMashiach are it. There are others who have written books on the subject. Dan Brown comes to mind. This is not one of them. If the Grail is a bloodline, and for clarity purposes I am not stating that it is, then that is an investigation for another time. It would be terribly difficult to convince me that a clay cup set in silver by a silversmith was somehow a metaphor for a bloodline, as if this were one of Daniel's dream interpretations. Speaking of which, here is another blood reference. This comes again from the Breton book. Idowin was buried in a shirt of fine linen, which he had worn when burying Yahusha, and which was stained with 3 spots of blood on the chest. He was buried by the 2 forked cross. A lot of you keep getting freaked out looking at pictures of the 2 forked cross. Well, there you go. The saints had lived in 12 huts around a never diminishing well at the foot of the holy hill. Yosef was buried in the very shirt of linen which he had worn while burying Yahusha. There were 3 spots of blood stained upon his chest. Seems as though the blood of Mashiach was important to Yosef. Still not seeing how any of this is a coded message for a royal bloodline, though. Do you understand? That doesn't mean there isn't a family line to be had. I'm simply not seeing it in these texts quite yet. Therefore, the Grail legend will have to be saved for another occasion. I have started out reading from the Book of the Natsarim. Here is what I wanted you to see. Getting back to the Book of the Natsarim, chapter 21. I'm sorry to ruin the book for some of you guys who haven't read it. Giving away the ending of the book. Some say Joseph of Arimathea married Miriam, mother of Yahusha, after the death of his wife, but this is a known heresy put about by those in ignorance of what is written. For his wife was not that Miriam. What the? Well, that just tosses everything I've researched into the garbage in a hurry. Yosef married Miriam, Miriam of Migdol, or some other Miriam. How could he? That double-crossing, low-down, double-timer. That was my first reaction when reading it. We're finally getting somewhere, but come on. How does somebody go about ending a book like that? It's literally the last verse. It gets all scandalous and up in your face and then takes a plunge right off the white cliffs of Dover. Try not to have a heart attack. How is marrying Miriam of the mother of Yahusha scandalous exactly? She was a widow needing taken care of. She was also his niece, and that's kosher. Miriam was on the older end of the spectrum, but then so was Yosef. Nothing heretical there. Hath the two consented? Seems to me that the scribe who ended the book with his added commentary had a score to settle. Joseph of Arimathea Rama did not write that, and the writer of the Gospel of Philip sure didn't write that. To better understand what is happening, we will have to retrace the conversation between Miriam of Migdol and Yahusha on the night that she anointed him with the expensive fragrance. This will be a short review. So reading it once more from the Book of the Natsarim 19. Miriam said, Sire, I have been a sinner, but have not sinned this last year, nor shall I sin again. Should I love once more, I will not now claim the rights of marriage which I once repudiated. Yahusha said, Love is a blending of Ruachoth and not a union of flesh. Woe to those whose love compounds discord in the place where love is fulfilled. If these things confound you, read the books of wisdom. Some of you were getting ready to write me a letter explaining how Miriam of Migdol couldn't possibly have married Yahusha because she said it would never happen again. Obviously, that's not quite yet, because she did marry again. Complications arise then, don't they? A dominant theme of Natsarim is the multitude of marriages and the union of Ruachoth in only one of them. If you jumped ahead rather than reading the previous chapters, then it is your loss. You will have to retrace your steps on your own. The complication relies upon the passages shown, whereas Yahusha and Miriam of Migdol became a unified Ruachoth. How could she become unified with Mashiach but then get with another man? She already said her love was reserved for the next man and nobody else. Even if Yosef did marry Miriam, that Miriam as he put it, then there is something else going on. A marriage perhaps, but one of protection rather than intimacy or even sexual fornication. Bereshith has already given us the inverted precedence in that Abraham told Pharaoh as well as Abimelech that Sarah was his sister rather than a wife. The reason being is that she was old and beautiful and everybody wanted a piece of her. Should Yosef truly desire to be the protector of Yehusha's betrothed, then a civil ceremony would be the most proper. He could support her without a turning of heads, and the kings of the earth would have to come through him first before claiming. There is more to this, so you know. The book of the Natsarim have ended there. The same source material has been dig through. The book of Britain again says, after our Adonai died, having been hung on the cross outside the city walls of Yerushalayim, Yosef of Arimathea or Arimathea took Miriam, the mother of Yehusha, into his home until Yochanan could make suitable arrangements. And then he was called Guardian of the Lady. What a fun title. Which title became confused in Britain with that of Guardian of the Sacred Vessel. Let's see if I got this right. Yosef started out as Miriam, the mother of Yehusha's caretaker, but only until Yochanan made arrangements. Because if you recall, on the cross, Yehusha said, "This is mother" to Yochanan. Makes sense. I'm following, I think. He then became known as Miriam, and who became a guardian of her, Yosef or Yochanan? And now I'm confused. Where are you at on a 1 to 10 scale of confusion, that is? The text can be read either way. I'm thinking this is yet another attempt at erasing any identity confusion regarding who Yosef carted off to Britain or France or wherever, but it isn't working. It seems even back then people thought the Holy was a lady when they are two separate things. Oh, he married her. Miriam, that is. The other Miriam. Which is it? Guardian doesn't sound like a husband, unless Yochanan is the guardian of Miriam, which still wouldn't be her husband anyways. But then how is that title getting confused with the sacred vessel guardian? Hopefully this isn't confusing for you guys. Why be so vague? Assuming this is still Yosef we're dealing with rather than Yochanan, then it seems to me that the guardian title is precisely what he was doing. He was guarding the lady. Guarding the lady meant taking care of her, like what Yochanan was doing with the other Miriam, the mother of Yehusha, keeping one hand upon the sword in the sheath so that the bad guys wouldn't lay a hand upon the woman. This is the betrothed, the Mashiach we're talking about. It's why there's so many coded messages throughout the annals of Scripture. Much is instituted, but very few come right out and say it. Other scribes simply won't believe it or would rather not have a married Mashiach. 4 is a pattern. And what do we see happening on the pattern scale? Miriam of Magdalene, the woman who poured nard upon the feet of the man whom she'd soon be speaking alone with in the garden, ends up on the same boat with the keeper of the grail. Not only that, but on the opposite end of the world, far from the clutches of the Yahudim and probably even Rome. What also just so happens to be the same geographical location as what I have proposed to be the epicenter of the 1,000-year reign. That is 5 or 6 coincidences, though there are more, far more. And I have already lost count. You and I both know, however, that a pattern in the dozens or the hundreds will always be a coincidence for those who have flagged this topic as the unthinkable thoughts in the face of their favored Trinity doctrine. Is it in any way ironic that these same individuals often consider themselves to be the bride of Christ? Ask them what that means. It's all supposed to be a metaphor, apparently. And wow, I survived that. That wore me out. I managed not to stumble through, I think, a lot of this instances. So tell me what you guys think. Don't all line up to stone me at once. And eggs are expensive now, so I'll take a few minutes to vent your thoughts, and then we'll jump into a reading of the book of the Natsarim. It's probably a lot to take in, and that's okay. It's okay. I threw a lot at you guys. It was one of those where I put a lot of, I think, thought into that. A lot of hopefully it was a lot of meat for you guys. And again, if you disagree and you're like, I don't care how much you throw at me, I will never believe that Yahushua HaMashiach would ever marry a woman, certainly not marry Magdalene. She was unworthy for him. I'm sorry, that came across as a little passive aggressive. But hopefully, even if you disagree, at the end of the day, hopefully you learn something in that. Hopefully you're like, wow, I feel like I understand a little bit more on some of these extra biblical books and so on and so forth.
Okay, I'm here. I think that if you combine all three of your different presentations about Mary, that it would be a bestseller. You should combine them all, put them in a book, and publish it.
I'm going to take a quick drink of coffee here because I got several more chapters to read. I read for 2 hours and my eyes are still keeping up. Thank you, carrots that I've been eating. And my voice is still accounted for, I think. So let's get right to this. Chapter 1 of the Book of the Natsarim. The birth of Yahusha the Nazarite, who became our master and interpreter of Elohim and the Torah, a worthy vessel for the greatest manifestation of the power of the Ruach HaKodesh seen on earth, occurred in this manner. About the time Yochanan the forerunner commenced teaching the way of the wilderness beside Yarden, and the year before Herod died, when Augustus Caesar ruled the Roman world, a babe was born. The father was now. Quick comment here. I want to, as I said last time, I want to read this and try to comment as little as possible. I can't let that go. This is one of the most talked about things. It says here that that Yochanan began his teaching about the time that Yahushua was born, and like, well, wait a second, what? So, and I don't know if that's a translational thing. Because if you recall, his mother Elizabeth, he fled with her, and as a babe, and they went off into the wilderness. I kind of think it maybe that's a mistranslation. It means the ministry of. Okay, so just for what it is, for what it's worth. Okay, where was I? In the year before Herod died, when Augustus Caesar ruled the Roman world, a babe was born. The father was Joseph, son of Heli, a carpenter of Galilee, and the mother Miriam, his wife, who had been a virgin pledged to Yahuwah in the temple by her father Simon, son of Joachim, son of Nathan, son of Eliezer. A decree had gone out that all who claimed kinship within the house of David should be gathered for enrollment at the city of David, called Bethlehem in Galilee. Therefore, Joseph, being rightfully born into the stock of David, took the scroll of his parentage and went to Bethlehem so his kinship could be established. Oh, I can't let this slide. I'm sorry, guys. Remember when we went through a lot of different books where it talked about Miriam was raised in the temple? I remember that became kind of a scandalous issue. We were trying to discuss, is this Catholic or what? This book that we're reading now is like the most un-Catholic book, okay? And it says right there, it says, Miriam, his wife, who had been a virgin, pledged to Yahuwah and the temple, okay? So there you have it right there. She was pledged to the temple, raised in the temple as a virgin. So that was one of those. There's so many little details in here that just connects the different books. It's unbelievable. I think we're on verse 4. Now Miriam, being then heavy with child, longed in her heart to be among her kinsmen, and she prevailed upon Joseph to take her, for Bethlehem was only a day's journey from them. The two with a she prevailed. How much did she have to argue or persist with her husband to take her? And he's like, okay, fine. We'll take the day's journey to Bethlehem to have the baby. The two with a servant came to Bethlehem at eventide, but because so many had gathered, the inns were filled. Then, as Miriam's time was close upon her after the journey, a man took pity on her and provided a cave used as a stable. There the travelers found shelter and rest. Pause again. That is the most messed up thing that, like, for all you women out there who have been in labor, and all you men out there, have you ever seen a woman in labor? It's like, you would think somebody would see poor Miriam out in the street in labor and go, like, here's a chair. Like, just, sit on something. Here's a sofa, Like, nobody was willing to offer her a bed. So this one guy's like, okay, fine, here's a cave. You can come into the cave. That night, Miriam's labors came upon her, and she suffered the pangs of childbirth. and cried out in pain. Now, this right here is a little different than some of what we read that the prophecy, and I think it was Isaiah, that he would come forth without pain. And then we read the gospel of infancy gospel of Yaakov and others, but said that it was the same thing. So I don't know. Take that for what it is. Here we see one that doesn't match up with some of the other books, and might I say, perhaps a prophecy. I for one think he came into the world without her going through the labor pains. Nearby, some shepherds were tending sheep, for in the midst of so many strangers, these needed protection, and hearing her cry, went to help. They provided a shepherd's basket, which was filled with straw, and placed it in the manger, and the newborn babe was wrapped in the clothes brought for him. After 8 days had elapsed, the child was named Yeshua, meaning one who delivers. For an angel of Yahuwah had appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, "That which lies with Miriam, your wife, is filled with the power of the Ruach HaKodesh, and will respond to the hopes of men." Later, men called him Yahusha, and because he fulfilled their hopes and was anointed with his power of the Ruach HaKodesh, he became acknowledged as the Messiah. Now, the stable was against the hill, behind an inn where sages from the east were saying, "Men of Sastira, wise in the books of heaven, and of Nimrod." That excited me so much reading that. Who carried the cross of fire. That's interesting too. The sacred fire, the cross of fire. So Joseph sent for them, requesting they come and foretell the child's future, for such was the custom. One of the sages said, "It is strange indeed for this child is born under no usual star, but under one that is a star in appearance only and not in nature, having a power not in other stars. He is destined for greatness and will motivate events touching the lives of all men." When the word of this was passed around, there was much excitement among those belonging to the house of David. And many, remembering the prophecies of Yochanan, for they had passed his way, wondered in their hearts, "Is this not he for whom we wait, the consolation of the Yahudim and deliverer of men?" This displeased the people of Bethlehem, who awaited another deliverer. When the sages spoke of the matter at their journey's end in Jerusalem, and word came of the excitement among those of the house of David in Bethlehem, there was great consternation among the priests and learned men. They tried to discover where the babe was, but the sages answered deviously and said, "His star points towards the east." An elder of the house of David, attending the blessing of the child on the 8th day, lifting up his voice and declared, "Surely this is he who has been promised to redeem us out of the hands of evil. This is he upon whom the power of the Ruach HaKodesh will descend, bestowing strength, compassion, and wisdom. Surely he will rule in the kingdom of Elohim." When the king heard about these things, and that a babe had been born who many claimed was destined to be the deliverer, he was greatly disturbed and summoned the council. With the council were learned scribes and elders who disputed among themselves concerning the babe. Some said that while Yahuwah's anointed would be born in Bethlehem, the deliverer would not, for the birth of Yahuwah's anointed in that place had been foretold by the prophets. Others said it might not be more than an enlightener who was expected to be born at that time. However, when many agreed that Yahuwah's anointed and the deliverer might be the same person, the king sent 3 men to discover the child. Just to note there, it will say this a couple other times in the book. This is a really interesting insight that many back then believed that there would be 2 messiahs that kind of come simultaneously. One would be the anointed with the teachings, and the other would be like a victor over the Romans, right? He would be the deliverer. And so here we see, well, they're saying, well, maybe he'll be both of them at once. We don't really know. The dispute before the council had been long, and Joseph had been forewarned. So when the men sent by Herod came to Bethlehem, Joseph had departed with his family. They went to the place where the kinsmen of Miriam lived. The men who came did not search long for Yahusha, for after the council had been dismissed, Herod slew the son who sat with them on the throne, as he had slain others of his blood. Later, Herod died himself. But after these happenings, the Romans did not bestow the title of king on any Yehudi, and it was unlawful for any man to claim the title. In this manner, the prophecy was fulfilled, which said, "A virgin shall give birth to a son, naming him Elohim with us." He will be the bearer of knowledge, discriminating between good and evil. But before this is given to the people, the land will lose its kings. When time had passed, Joseph and Miriam came to Jerusalem and stayed at the house of a relative, a man strongly set against wrongdoing and well learned in the Torah. The 40 days having been accomplished for the purification of Miriam, she came to the temple, and Joseph offered the prescribed sacrifice and dedicated the child. Just quick note here, you can see a complete deviation from the idea that they went to Egypt. I mean, did they go to Egypt and return in 40 days? Or what happened there? Because it looks like he's only 40 days old and he's at the temple. Hearing from Joseph and Miriam the things which the sages had foretold about the child Yehusha, the devout man took the babe into his arms and praised Yahuwah in this manner. Because the things foretold have come about, your servant is prepared to depart in peace. For my eyes have been gladdened by the deliverer of my people, a beacon light for others and the glorifier of your name. He will teach all men the ways of Yahuwah and how to walk in his paths. So swords shall be made into plowshares and spears into billhooks, and shalom will reign over men. Joseph and Miriam could not understand the meaning of this and asked what was meant. Whereupon the man replied, I hold a sapling which will grow into a sturdy tree, under the shade of which many nations will find peace. Yet he will also test the strength of our people, tearing them apart in disputes. He comes as a separator, dividing the sheep from the goats, showing each his rightful place. He will place a sword in the hands of the weak and strengthen them, and the ungodly will be smitten. After complying with the requirements of the priestly law, Joseph and Miriam returned with the infant to their home in Galilee, a small place in a hollow at the foot of a hillside. There the child grew up, developing a strong body and keen mind, for he was strangely talented. He was wise beyond his years and deft with hands, and when old enough he began learning the craft of plow making. His parents, following the custom, went each year to Jerusalem for the festival of deliverance. And when Yehusha was 12, they went as usual, but this time taking him with them. Having remained the 7 days of the festival, Joseph and Miriam set off to return home and let the boy linger in Jerusalem, for a kinsman of theirs was also returning, and they thought Yehusha was in his company. Having gone a day's journey and finding Yehusha was not with his kinsmen, they became perturbed and at first light in the morning returned to Jerusalem. It was some time before they found Yehusha in a small outside room of the temple, sitting before an instructor of the priestly law. His parents were astonished at finding him accepted among learned men, and the teacher expressed amazement at the child's love of learning. But Miriam scolded the boy for his inconsideration, saying, "We have suffered much during the search for you." Yehusha replied, "Why search for me elsewhere, knowing I must concern myself with the work of my father?" This saying disturbed the instructor. Neither could his parents understand the meaning of the reply, but they took the boy away with them. Henceforth, he always obeyed his parents, but Miriam kept these things in the storehouse of her heart. As Yehusha grew up, his intelligence increased, and he was well liked by all, but he was a solitary child, much given to wandering. Chapter 2. Pausing for a drink. Joseph died when Yehusha was a youth, and that, of course, connects with other scripture we read. At that time, working as a craftsman among the Canaanites. After Yehusha had been away a long time, he returned to the house of his brothers. I mean, that right there is interesting. So this is saying that he went somewhere. We don't know where he went. The Book of Britain seems to suggest he went to a group of followers that were similar to John the Baptist, and he may have gone to Qumran. We don't really know. We don't know if he went to England with Joseph. We don't know if he went to Qumran, but he went somewhere for a long time. One day while he worked under the shade of a tree, they came to him and said, "Out in the wilderness by Yarden, there's a man who cleanses people by immersion in water. He claims strange knowledge and calls himself the Forerunner. We are going to see what he teaches." Now, this is why I said before there had to be a mistranslation, because clearly John the Baptist has just come on the scene rather recently. He's kind of well known now, and they're all talking about him. So he hasn't been around since before Yehusha was born preaching, clearly. Yehusha said, "I have heard of these things, and surely is the son of our forefather Yeshai prayed to be cleansed of his secret faults and presumptions. The sons of her father should not stand aloof from cleansing. I will go with you. The brothers of Yahusha said, This man is called Yochanan. He heralds the coming of an enlightener who will be an all-wise instructor in goodness. He himself does not bear this new light which will dispel the darkness in men's minds. He tells of one who will grant men the privilege of becoming children of Elohim, awakening to eternal life that part within them not born of earthly desires. And little do his brothers know that they're inviting the Messiah out to be anointed. You got to love brothers. So Yahusha and his brothers went out seeking Yochanan, finding him beside the Yarden, at the place of crossing where there was a pool. The hairs on the head of Yochanan were already white. Yochanan seeing Yahusha... so does that mean he was really old? But it said already white, so I don't know. Yochanan seeing Yahusha among those gathered about him said, Look, all of you, here he is, a man in whom there is no guile, the true Lamb of Elohim, the one we await. For Sethel, sending me forth to baptize, instructed me thus, When you discover a man worthy to be the receptacle of the Ruach HaKodesh in abundance, the same shall you acknowledge as the enlightener. Hearing these words, Yahusha joined with those to be cleansed. But when he stood before the forerunner in the water, Yochanan said, You have greater powers of cleansing than I, yet you come to me. Yahusha replied, The power to cleanse and revitalize with the Ruach is not in men, but in the Ruach which fills men. It is important each should be allowed to do whatever he is called upon to do. Yahusha asked of Yochanan, What do you know about me? Yochanan said, Years gone by I had a vision of 3 heavenly lights, and as the sun sank, so they rose. A flame of fire went up over Jerusalem, and smoke filled the temple, and a star fell down into Yehuda. The meaning I know, for it was this, the deliverer is born, and woe unto the house of Herod. Woe to you scribes, and your interpretations of the Torah. The star that appeared and stood over Jerusalem was a child planted into Bethlehem from out of the heavenly heights, as was foretold, and it was prophesied he would be the deliverer. The fire that burned was the fire of a strange altar. I prophesy great things for you. You are the true son of Elohim. Soon you will see the glory of heaven revealed, and the power of the Ruach HaKodesh will be poured out upon you as a stream of pure water. The time has come to proclaim yourself. Peace, peace on you, whom our Elohim has chosen as his messenger, for you will proclaim the true gospel. Strengthen your heart, for the road ahead is steep and stony. No man is hated so much as one who tries to point out defects in character and attitudes and seeks to guide men along the path of right and beneficial living. I'll repeat that one more time. No man is hated so much as one who tries to point out defects in character and attitudes and seeks to guide men along the path of right and beneficial living. So if you are a well-loved person, then you know you're probably not doing these things. And if, I'll say, Jesus is well-loved by many, then that version of Jesus might not be doing these things. Just FYI. Then Yochanan took Yahusha down to the river and baptized him, and he was overshadowed by the Ruach HaKodesh and became fully filled with its power, so his face glowed. And the people wondered and were bewildered, for they did not understand. I love that... Yet the face of their forefather Moshe had also glowed after he had been in the presence of the Ruach HaKodesh of Yahuwah. I love that reference there, the glowing. Yochanan said, Go and wait upon the mountainside nearby. Later, Yochanan went to join Yahusha and told him that he was the anointed one, but should not yet make this known to the people. Then Yochanan prayed thus, We give thanks, O Yahuwah, with souls purified through realization of our misdeeds, and Ruachoth reaching upward to commune with you. It is by your power alone we have seen the light of truth manifested and come to know the secret of your hidden name. In humility we call you by the name of Father, because you have shown us a father's compassion and kindness. And because we know you chastise and discipline us after the manner of a father. You have granted us freedom of activity, that we may enjoy the blessings of life. We have been saved by the waters of your affection. We approach you as the only good and great being, asking only that we be united with you in the waters of the Ruach and never become separated from the source of life. This is how Yochanan testified among concerning those events. On that day, the Ruach overflowing from Elohim came with a great surge of power. I did not know this man from others, but seeing him, I recalled what I had seen told by those who gave me power to cleanse with water. They had said, when you find someone so filled with the power of the Ruach HaKodesh he can hardly contain it, you will know him for one who will baptize with the cleansing power of the Ruach HaKodesh. I have experienced this power and testify that this man is the true son of Elohim, the enlightener and deliverer. Yochanan left Yahusha on the mountainside, where he stayed 3 days fasting and communicating with the powers above. Then he went back to the riverside. Yochanan was standing with 2 of his disciples, Yahusha sitting apart, and Yochanan said to those with him, there is the one giving himself as an offering of Elohim, the enlightener of the world and the deliverer of our people. Then the 2 disciples went to Yahusha and said, tell us about your teachings. Shall we follow your way or that of Yochanan? Yahusha said, there is the way of the wilderness, and there is my way, alike in teaching, but calling to different men. What Yochanan teaches accords with the Torah, even as my teaching. Obey either or both. They are the Torah. From that day forth, Yahusha had power to heal the sick and to do many things. But he went out into the wilderness bordering Yarden, uncertain about his next move. While there, hungry and thirsty, he fought with the flesh, resisting the temptation to go down among the habitations of men and use his powers for selfish ends. The same Ruach of Yahuwah, which overshadowed Yahusha, overshadowed the creation. It enlightens outer darkness and bestows life and is eternal. Yochanan was one of those who can see the Ruachoth of men, and so he knew the nature of Yahusha. These things took place at Betharaba, which means the place of crossing. All right, I think I'm going to end it there. That's actually a really good cutoff. And I'm hoping you guys maybe took notes or, picked up on some stuff. And what stuck out to you guys there? I mean, I'll start. I think one thing that I found fascinating in there is I had talked to you guys several weeks back about pre-existence. And I mean, everybody knows that Yahushua HaMashiach pre-existed. I mean, if you believe that he is the Messiah, right? Even if you're a Trinitarian or not, he pre-existed. But the common idea that is taught to us in Christianity or Catholicism or fill in the blank is that, he could have come out of the womb tap dancing, hello, my baby. And that he was, he was all knowledgeable, but he had to pretend to learn, right? He had to pretend to fit in with the, but that's not the way this is presented. And I think this is pretty legit. Like, it was interesting that the Yochanan, the baptizer, the immerser, he had to tell him, hey, he's like, you're the Messiah. I'm telling you now, you're the Messiah. And like Yahusha, he's showing up with his brothers, and they're not suspecting him of anything. They're not thinking he's anything special. And then all of a sudden, it's like, boom, here he is. And then he goes out in the wilderness, and he's like, what next? I don't know what to do. There's this outpouring of the Ruach HaKodesh on him, and he's like, man, I could use this for evil purposes. I could use this for to serve myself. What do I do? And he had to go out. So, and then we're going to see throughout this book as he just becomes more and more knowledgeable until he's just blowing the lid off everything. So what are you guys' thoughts on that?
I concur. Also, I wanted to note that when you said, was John that old that he had white hair? Moses had white hair when he came back down off the mountain. So obviously, John in the wilderness had a few encounters with the angels of heaven and was tutored by Yahweh in the desert, I'm sure. So he probably had that same white hair effect that Moses did. But yes, I really like what you said about predestination, and especially his learning. I never looked at he had to learn that. I'm sure he was born with pretty intense knowledge, and that he was probably speaking, as I've heard, right away, even from the womb.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm reading here is that by the end of this book, I mean, Yahusha is very clearly like, look, guys, I'm the Messiah. Like, I am the son of Elohim, and nothing that he could say boldly claims like nothing that I say or do that I did not learn from the presence of the Most High, right? What I'm reading here in the early parts is that he had to learn even this foreknowledge, like I don't know. I mean, what I'm reading here is that like when he was baptized, he may have not had those memories. He didn't know that he was. I don't know. Something that just came with him in time. But that's what I'm reading. And the white hair comment is I think spot on. That it said that. Oh, it looks like John, you really want to say something. Jump in there.
I was just going to say I was having a conversation yesterday with my friend, and we were talking about some controversial topics. And when you're saying that this comment you made about he could come out and be tap dancing when he come out, that would totally go against the laws of nature. And when I say the laws of nature, I mean of course the laws of our Father. And he said, well, God can do anything he wants to, and I'm like, no, he can't. That's what we've been taught. He can't break his own laws. There are quite a few things, if you do an in-depth study, that the Father cannot do. And I think that's one of them. He's going to follow his own laws of nature, and I believe that, that the Messiah, when he was born a normal child. And you're correct. I think he did have to learn all these things up until a certain point, and then that knowledge began to come to him of who he truly was. Because, of course, his parents would have known for sure. So I think they would have also taught him that as he's growing older.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to say. That I like how this book is showing that he's just kind of growing up. Like we see him actually starting from child and learning the ways of the Most High, and he's like coming into his ministry in that sense.
What I'm wondering is maybe perhaps John was more likely to have talked early. What was the age, Noel, that it said he started his ministry? He might have been like 9 months old. How do we know? How do we know? Because what if he was born something like Noah? He's got the white hair, and he was talking early. I mean, in the animal kingdom, a horse, a colt, will come from its mother's womb, and it takes first stumbling steps. I mean, a human baby would not do that, but not usually. But who's to say it cannot happen? So who's to know? But Messiah had to learn. He had to be like us in all manner. And we struggle. I don't know about you all, but I certainly struggle. What do I do next? I mean, I'm currently in that mode right now. What do I do next? But John, being one who is foreshadowing, a forerunner, maybe perhaps he was more like Noah, since he did have a special office to accomplish. That's just something I was thinking of.
Just going to point out once more on his white hair, since that's the topic of the hour. It mentioned that it had already grown white, right? Like it seems to be saying like it went white ahead of his time. When I think of going white ahead of your time, like, I guess a worldly example would be like Steve Martin. You look back in the 70s, and did that guy, like, I think he went like straight into puberty with white hair. Because like his earliest roles, he had white hair. So it's almost like saying like, yeah, like other men of his age didn't have white hair yet, but he did. And I really like the the comparison to Moshe. Also, when it talks about Yahusha like glowing, that Yochanan could see it. I've never had the experience of seeing somebody glow. This actually I think says that it's what was it? Does it say purple? Yeah, it's purple. We will see later in the book that it's growing purple, which is really fascinating. Though no, it's blue. It's blue. It's like the color of it's like a purplish blue, whatever, like the color of heaven, like the color of the firmament. That a person that's filled, the more filled you are with the Ruach HaKodesh, you actually have this glow around you, and which is actually what they say about the Shroud of Turin. I'll be presenting that next week, and there's a connection there with how they said that the image was like this, like radioactive blue purple color. But I'm sure many of you have maybe had the experience of you're around somebody, like maybe just a stranger on the street, and you just feel the presence of the Ruach HaKodesh in them. Like it's really strong. I don't know if you guys can identify with that. I know that many times in my life I'll just pass someone by and there's like this joy within me, this other person, and there's like this connection. I'm like, man, this person right here, this person's filled with the Spirit. And many times I'll ask for prayer for affirmation, and all of a sudden like that person will start singing praises or something. Like, yep, that guy's filled with the Spirit. And so that's, I like that what Yochanan saw here in Yahusha is like, man, this guy is filled with the Spirit. Anybody have any last thoughts? Anybody have any last thoughts before we officially close this tonight?
Well, I just wanted to say how much I really enjoyed the whole presentation, and it you're painting a whole picture. I mean, to me it goes it all fits. I don't have any in fact, several things became more clear to me tonight. Um, and it's interesting because I've been having some of these type conversations about, what marriage really means, and it just answered a lot of questions. Especially, I loved the part about, and I wish we could look over this a little more. Where it talks about where he said that some marriages in front of priests are what did you call it?
Oh,
As opposed
fornication.
to, yeah, fornic. I thought that was fascinating. I'd really like to explore that topic a little more.
Yeah, well, I'll just throw this out there now, and I didn't have time to add this to the presentation, but I would have liked to. It would have just been a whole, it was a 2-hour presentation. It would have gone even further out there. But here's what I think the union of Ruachoth is. Okay, it's now. Don't people start throwing eggs at me because they're really expensive when I say this, but it's what I would call spiritual androgyny. Okay. Now, androgyny is, we see this happening today with the LGBTQ culture and the, all the different names for what people are becoming, what they identify as biologically versus whatever they are, and men becoming women and women becoming men and other things. And that's actually of an abomination. Okay, that is clearly against the Torah. You are a man or a woman. That is not what I'm saying, and that is perverse on so many levels. All right, but there's something, I don't know what else to call it. Like so when a man and a woman are united, a union of Ruachoth eternally, it is a type of it's not saying that the man and woman, like a woman enters, like becomes the man and she ceases to exist, or she's a man eternally. It's like, no. Like there's going to be something that is a mystery to us, that in eternity, that they are forever, they are two separate beings. The man and the woman, they are two separate conscious entities, but they have this ikad. They are united together. It's kind of like the confusion that many people have with the Trinity. The ikad that the Father and the Son have together, and the Holy Spirit has. And Yahushua prays that we would have that same ikad with the Father as He has, that same union, connection. there's going to be that type of echad between the man and the woman, and they will be together, like stitched together. And it's something that I think that we can't really understand in this day and age on this side of the curtain, though it's something that physical androgyny is mimicking, and from a very perverse perspective of what we see happening in the world right now, where people are switching sexes and all that kind of stuff. So that is there's another passage from the Gospel of Philip that it actually talks about Adam and Eve and says that that if Chua were to become unified with Adam again, it says that death would forever cease to exist. And so that's really interesting. And so that seems to be the idea of the kingdom of heaven when it is fully manifested, that death will cease to exist, and the man and the woman will, the rib partner will return to the man again.
I'd just like to make another comment as far as what I consider this in-depth, way out there in the left field teaching and understanding that we're going through. I think it's perfect, because the farther that it moves us away from mainstream theology and the teaching of the church and all that, it takes us out of the worldly view of theology and Christianity, which is perfect. I mean, because we're told to come out of her, my children. So if you still have this worldly view of Christianity and the Bible and all that, the mainstream theology, you can't be in the right, you can't be going down the right path, because Scripture clearly says the gateway is small and very few who are going to enter. So I love it. I mean, the more that we move away from that mainstream theology, I honestly feel the closer we are getting to our Heavenly Father.
Yeah, I know that this is one of the things that has really excited me, because when I read the book of the Natsarim, and we'll get into it, we're just over, you guys already saw it because I quoted from like the woman at the well and other things where they talk about the union of the Ruachoth. And this is some deep stuff, guys. I mean, it's like Yahusha's straight out saying this, that a lot of marriages are just fornication. And it's like, what? But it's the same thing that Paul was saying with circumcision, that a lot of circumcised people are uncircumcised, and the Jews are like, what? How could you say that? We're circumcised. You want to check? How can you say we're uncircumcised? He's like, you're not spiritually circumcised. I'm sorry. And it's the same thing. Yahusha's like, yeah, I know you went in front of a priest, but that's all fornication. You're not married. And so that's the question. How do we become spiritually united, right? That should be the goal, right? We move past the physicality of it, the lust, the carnal lust, and that kind of stuff, and we're truly united together as a man and a woman. And it's that's some deep stuff. But it's also just so exciting, and as I mentioned, Sarah and I have been really excited about this going, because it was always really sad, like we're gonna die and that's it. Like, we're just gonna kind of remember that we were married at one time, but we're not. We're just gonna be like normal people. It's like, no, it's like you can truly, and this also explains the whole thing. I think it brought into light the woman that has her husband dies and she has no child through no heir through that child through their husband, and so she goes and marries the brother. And remember, it says in the Torah that if the brother refuses to lay with her and to produce a child for his brother, that she can go like spit in his face and that kind of stuff in front of the elders, and how dare you, and this kind of. And she's not wanting to have a child with her brother because she is necessarily attracted to his brother, or because fill in the blank. It's because her Ruachoth is bound to the brother. The original husband. That is who she is bound to. And so you are actually creating a child for that brother. And again, you could say, well, what about genetically it's different, right? It's not really truly her original husband's child. Well, that may be, but when you get into the whole pre-existence argument and where souls come from and this kind of stuff, it's like, it's still the soul coming from heaven, from above, and it's in the name of the husband, the original husband. And this is where you can get into genealogies, where you can see people accredited to being the father or the mother, and they weren't really, but they were the spiritual father or the mother. So, I mean, it seems to me like all of this is really coming together, and I find it really exciting to think about.